Welcome in, welcome in. How's it going? How's it going? Let me get everything kind of set up here while people are hopping in. That should be better. There we go. Okay. Can you hear? Everything good audio-wise? It's having some camera wigging out issues, so I'm going with the center stage camera, which may or may not follow me around a bit more. We'll see. But hopefully it works just the same. Doing pretty well. You doing pretty good. Yeah, let's see here. Oh, let's change this. Welcome in, Ollie. There we go. Okay, let's get into this. Crack this just a tiny bit. Get some more light in here. Okay, I had a couple things I wanted to, let me pull up my notes for this live stream. Okay, so there was a couple questions about Beast, Bale, and the Forces of the Dark One, which I think is the conversation that was happening in the Magic and Mysticism chat in Discord, which I think is really, there are some really good things being talked about there. Let me just pop open a new one. Okay, so this is kind of what I was thinking, and you can tell me if this is helpful or not helpful. So beast to me equals animal. So anything that is not sentient enough to have tools or structures more than like a bird's nest or a den, like those are different. But if they're not like building roads or whatever, it's a beast. So wolves, bears, snakes, maybe certain types of dragon-like creatures like worms or other types, but that's kind of what I was thinking for beast. And then Bale would be supernatural creatures, so reliant on magic for existence. Things like ghosts, zombies, mimics, things that couldn't exist outside of their magical conditions. And then we were talking about, do we lump all Bale into Forces of the Dark One, or do we have specific special monsters and creatures that are either enhanced or created by exiled magic, specifically the Forces of the Dark One? I don't know which is more helpful. I think originally I had considered that anything supernatural, any evil supernatural creature that relies on magic for its existence would be a Bale. If it's a good magical creature, then it wouldn't be considered a Bale. It would just be a fairy, a gnome, whatever it is. So I've been kind of juggling that. The only caveat here is this: wouldn't the Forces of Darkness know his name? And if so, what does that mean for the people of the realm? Like, do they know? Because like we talked about originally, the idea was that the Dark One's name, the reason we call him the Dark One is because we don't actually know what his original name was, because the archive and the government or whatever. Oh, dang it. Is it going to do this again all day? Let me, anyways, while I'm connecting this, the kingdom, the archive, whatever, had decided that it was so unsafe for people to know the name of the Dark One that they redacted it from everything. And if you have like a legion of an armies or peoples or whatever's that are forces of the Dark One, wouldn't they know who they serve? Wouldn't they know his name? So that's kind of a question. And then you could also solve this with a different language. So they speak a language that is unknown and is a dark, evil, twisted language. That could be a solution, or it could also just be a cop out of like actually having to confront a challenging solution to this problem. But as of now, I'm kind of leaning towards this. And I think if I was to make it into a Venn diagram, there would be a slight overlap between these two. There'd be some Bales that are forces of darkness, and vice versa. And maybe a little bit of overlap between what people consider beast and Bale. That could be up for interpretation. There doesn't need to be like a exact taxonomic divide of like, this is what makes it one thing. Because I think we also talked about, well, aren't there some things that are influenced by the dark magic that's coming back to the realm, but not necessarily directly under servitude of the Dark One, like giant bears and giant wolves that are now more evil than they used to be. And I think that would probably fit into somewhere between the two. And some people in the realm might call it a Bale. They might refer to, well, there was this, running bear that was evil and destroyed our whole village, therefore it must be a Bale because we've never seen a bear like that before. But at the same time, the archive might say, well, actually, technically, it's a beast. So I don't really know. I feel like it's more complicated than the last definition of beast and Bale. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, you have to kind of draw a line somewhere. And I feel like it's easiest to just say anything supernatural that's evil is a Bale. Anything that is natural and evil and or dangerous could just be beast. People don't necessarily consider wolves or bears evil, but they consider them dangerous and, in a way, enemies because they will plunder your village and take your children and eat your chickens or whatever. And so they are things to be defended against and things to be wary of, but they're not necessarily supernatural. So this whole section down here, I'm kind of leaning towards, I don't really know. I think it's easier if we just keep it beast and Bale. These are like the two evils. And there doesn't need to be any official distinction. I know we always go back to like well, we just don't know. And like we do know, but I think the people colloquially, for the sake of storytelling and whatnot, there doesn't need to be a super distinct difference. I think colloquially people would say beast and Bale, and that would be the extent of how they refer to dangers in the realm. My camera's cutting out again. I don't know. Do we like that, or would we rather have a third option that is specifically for the forces of the Dark One? I don't know. I just figured we'd try to cover this a little bit before we get into kingdoms and people or people and races. Since we're letting some people hop in here still. Let me know what you think. Yeah, we can come back to this, but as of right now, I'm kind of more in this camp. And I think within Bale, there's a wide variety of what the monsters would look like. This could be anything from a zombie or a skeleton or a ghost, a phantom of some kind, that wouldn't necessarily directly serve the Dark One, like, and his cause. But then there could be other more sentient creatures and or more purpose-driven Bale that like would be in servitude of the Dark One specifically. And I think because the Dark One represents evil and chaos, it almost doesn't matter if the creature knows that it's serving the Dark One or not. As long as it's wreaking havoc and destroying cities and civilization and instilling terror, then it's kind of doing what the Dark One wants. But there may be other specific groups within and creatures within Bale that are conscious and also serve, I am ordered by the Dark One to do X, Y, Z. And that gets into maybe the forces of the Dark One. It fits entirely within Bale, but then you'd also have humans and or other races that could turn and they would be within the forces of the Dark One. So I don't know. I don't think there's much that would help from drawing super distinct lines. I think Dark Force would be a different group than monsters, because if we do not make a distinction, then we're going to only end up with problems and confusion. Yeah, I think this makes the most sense, just being, to be fair, could be some beasts, some Bale, and we just can't throw all skeletons, orcs, monstrosities like that into a bag called the Dark Forces. Yeah. A three-way split might be better if we're separating natural enemies, unnatural entities, and creatures made by the Dark One. Possibly route this too, but it might avoid confusion. If there are beasts, Bale, and the Dark One baddies, it's starting to seem like just a D&D setting with a big bad evil bad guy. Yeah, that's the hardest thing with the Dark One is like, how do we stay away from just the big bad evil guy? Um, yeah. So I don't know. I'm kind of more in this camp where there's a slight overlap in the Venn diagram between the two, where some people might there's it's more of a gradient, like it's basically two, and then there's this little gray area in the middle where people are it could be Beast, it could be Bale, it doesn't really matter. It's enemies that are attacking our villages and whatever. And then I think within Bale, we would see some very specific forces of the Dark One, like undead legions or demons of sorts and monsters and creatures like that. So that's kind of where I'm leaning for now, but we'll obviously come back to this for future reference. I don't think it'll impact peoples and races too much, but it could. So stick with Beast and Bale's distinctions, but neither has any affiliation to the Dark One. I would say that Bale has at least some connection to the Dark One, where the Dark One is like the darkness and the magic creeping back into the realm is the reason that the darkness is coming back, right? Like that's where the magic. I mean, magic is a broad definition. What people consider to be unnatural magic or mysterious magic, mythic magic, where it's magic that hasn't been present previously, is stemming from the growth and power of the Dark One, which is like the traditional fantasy trope. The darkness is coming back, and we got to stop the darkness. That's like what all stories kind of come down to. But I think the supernatural creatures, whether the Dark One sat there and created them and then sent them into the land, or whether his influence and power made them spring up in the land, I think is kind of indistinguishable to the average Spire folk. I think they're just the same, basically. And then they've also noticed that beasts are more aggressive, kind of thing. We're having with TDF distinction if we do not make them have an original vibe. Yeah, I think we'll have there will be some creatures within Bale that will be explicitly the Dark One type of stuff. So I guess not every, yeah. I guess it comes down to I'm trying to think of a good way to do this. I need a Venn diagram. But so if we had Beast equals animal, Bale equals supernatural creatures, whatever. Within Bale you have let's say zombies, ghosts, and then you'd have forces of the Dark One, and that would be within that. You could have lurkers or demons, whatever. So and those would have a very specific look and feel to them because they would be handcrafted-ish by the Dark One and sent in to do his bidding. These would be ones that are consciously following the Dark One and would have a similar look and feel to them and use a similar magic. And then these other ones would just be consequential spawnings of dark magic. Because the dark magic is here, Bale is sprouting. And on top of that, the Dark One is sending in his own forces. And those are the ones that will look very similar. So you get the traditional zombies, skeletons, ghosts, phantoms, werewolves, vampires, that sort of thing. Those can all come from Bale, and they don't have to work for the Dark One. They don't even have to know who he is at all. And then there could be within that things that are explicitly the Dark One sending in his forces to do his bidding, whatever. So I think that's probably what it will turn into. This will be the force of the Dark One will fit entirely under Bale. Not all Bale are the forces of the Dark One, but all forces of the Dark One are probably Bale, unless they are traitors to the kingdom, basically. Anyways. Do we plan to make the Dark One an infernal satanic figure? I don't know if directly. I don't think so. I picture the Dark One... I mean, the Dark One is as the Venerants are, so there's they're more amorphous and beyond, but they also have we have the physical forms that people associate with them. Come on. There we go. Yeah, they don't manifest in the mortal realm, but people associate them with like images, and each culture might have a different, slightly variation on them, but they'll associate them with their domains, their fortune, war, knowledge, these sorts of things. So they'll have some tropes, and I think the dark one is one of them, the exiled one. I don't know if it'll necessarily be a satanic figure, but I think demon is probably the closest way. I don't know, I'm picturing like Warhammer demons, so like these huge monstrosities with wings, and I mean they'll look different. They won't be like your traditional like chains and necessarily just fire. But I picture the dark one being more of a dark wizard than I do a Satan figure, if that makes sense. Not that there can't be any overlap, but I mean I think horns and like that sort of thing, but maybe like deer horns. More of like some great lich. Somewhere I think a little bit if Satan and the if Satan's on one side, like traditional I don't know when the Satan imagery came about, but if Satan's on one side and Sauron's here as like some sort of satanic wizard, I mean he's not really satanic. But I think there's like some Warhammer chaos demons, and then Sauron, I think the dark one is probably a little bit more on the dark wizard, sorcerer, god side than on the satanic side. So, yeah, the demons, angels, etc. are too Catholic coded. Yeah, I think so. And there's, I don't know, when I think of traditional dark fantasy, I don't think it's too reliant on that sort of imagery. I think there are some aspects of it that definitely are. Priests and vampires are very like holy water, and werewolves and that sort of thing is very Catholic coded, but it doesn't necessarily rely on that. I think the dragons, the elves, and dwarves are kind of completely independent of that sort of imagery. So I think it'd be, yeah, Balrog looking shadow monster, yeah, that sort of thing. Not necessarily like a satanic demon, but some sort of great, mysterious dark force. Yeah, somewhere between a lich king and a demon-looking thing, but not necessarily just Satan, cackling on his throne and like whatever. So, let's get into peoples and races. So, I mean, unless there's other questions for that, but I think that's at least helpful to go over beforehand. If we need to come back to it, we can. I'm sure we'll be back a bunch of times, but I think if this is the next realm event, we'll end up doing this over again a couple times of like refreshing and clarifying things. So with peoples and races, some questions I want to answer is, what is the format going to look like? How many races are we doing? And how many regions or cultures are we allowing per race? Because if you think about traditional fantasy, Lord of the Rings, we have like D&D, there's the Wood Elves, the High Elves, and the Drow, like the Dark Elves, which is like 3. In Lord of the Rings, you have the Wood Elves, you have Rivendell Elves, which are different than the Mirkwood, the Green Elves. I don't remember exactly the distinction, but there are different kingdoms. So that's kind of something I want to clarify. Obviously, to do before the realm event happens, I want to get the website up as a reference. Hopefully, I don't think it's 100% needed, but it would be really, really helpful. And then clarify region basics. So if we do decide to say which region are your people, if you want to write into the stories which region, having more reference points than just the Valenholds would be helpful. I think clarifying some basics, extra stuff. I don't know if we need a map, but maybe put some labels on the map that we do have. Could be good. Okay, so here's what I've been thinking about. I think we can break up peoples and races into 2 different things. There are the kingdom-affiliated races, and this goes into people who participate and in society within SpireHelm as a kingdom. Not just in the realm, but they participate in trade, travel, governance, taxes. They participate in the market at a minimum. Things they understand society. That's kind of it. And then we could break the other part into unaffiliated or dependent races and tribes. So these would be people that, like they're friendly with the kingdom maybe. Sometimes, but not always. They don't necessarily see the king as their king, but they have their own tribes, they kind of do their own thing, and they don't necessarily butt heads. So they're not directly against the kingdom as a whole. Like they might not have an entire like grudge against them like the Dark One and his forces would, but they may butt heads with villages independently and say, hey, we need, like, we're running out of stuff, we're here to pillage and take everything, and then we'll leave you alone for another 2 months while you get more farms and crops and stuff, and then we'll come back and raid you again. Or they just do their own thing, and if you come into their territory like the giants, then they'll kill you because you're in their territory. So I think that's where I'm leaning as far as the distinctions between the two. Let me catch up. I think the essay is no longer needed. The changes to Dark Forces are very pleasing. Okay, perfect. Good. Yeah, I agree that there wasn't a very good distinction previously, and I think, once again, my hardest thing is like clarifying and communicating ideas. I have the visions in my head, but then clarifying that is difficult, but it's definitely needed. So if there's anything like that, point it out, and I'll make sure to clarify. So, as far as which ones I want to be in the Realm event, Dragonkin, I have some ideas for, and I think this will be one that, because of how rare these people will be, I think we'll leave them for like a live stream that I'll do, and we can talk as a community and bounce ideas back and forth, but I don't think it'll be like an open Realm event thing. Humans, I think, are just the standard, and I think everybody knows what a human is, and I don't think we're going to put our own unique twist on humans in this world. I think they're going to be your classic fantasy human. I think that helps with people coming into the project and what they assume a dark fantasy world will entail. So we'll leave that as is. So then we get into what people would write about. We have elf, dwarf, halfling, and an extra race. That's what we talked about potentially. And then we have the unaffiliated stuff. Orcs is one that a lot of people really wanted to write about. And these would be kind of blurring the line between beast and human, or peoples, or whatever, where currently my vibe from orcs is some may participate in society, some may participate in their own tribes, and some may be complete barbarians and have cultures that are like just way out there. And so this could be an unaffiliated race and tribe. Giants, I kind of think, fall into the same category, where they're more rare. They live in some, harder to get to regions in small groups, not like orcs maybe, but they're more, groups of 10 maximum instead of hundreds or, more. And then there's all these extras that we could do. Gnomes, fairies, merfolk, swamp folk, if you want like a lizard people or frog people. I thought it'd be cool to have like a specific unique twist, kind of like the Ignispecs is a twist on the Oracle. It could be cool to have a specific race that's kind of a twist on fairies or gnomes or something that is a guide. So they've sprung up in this age of magic out of nowhere. People don't know who they are, but they're able to like traverse the wildlands easier, and they can not be as confused by the dark magic and the twisting of forests and whatnot. And then we've also got, do we want the magic in the realm to twist normal animal species into sentience? So we got like your wolves, like a half wolf person, your anthropomorphic rabbits, frogs, owls, birds, otherwise. Do they talk, or is that too whimsical? Is that more traditional fantasy? Does it really fit for dark fantasy, or do we just leave all animals that aren't explicitly these kind of people out? So think about that for a second. Let me know what you think. While you guys are thinking about that, I've come up with a little bit of a history, I think, that will help inform how we look at developing these races. So I've split it into ancient, old, classic, and new races. So the ancient races is like, this is an age before time itself, divine. This is like your Garden of Eden, crazy, like we don't even, it's all myth. We don't have any archaeological anything to back this up. This is just myth. And these dragonkin people, which I'm still trying to think of a better name for, are kind of a remnant of this age, if there ever was an age, or if they're just gods, basically. Like they're the closest thing we have to the Venerants. To see one is to meet the very gods. And so this is who Alythius is, and I think I'm leaning towards this is who the Sanctiarchs, the original 5 Sanctiarchs, would be. So you'd have Alythius, and he would somehow, either magically or divinely through benediction or some other way, hatch these from like holy eggs, 5 of these creatures that are so incredibly rare that it's like, you know, there are so few dragon kin around that to see one is excruciatingly rare. And so he births these sanctiarchs, and they go out in the realm and fight and protect the people. And so when people see one, you know, they're like shiny scales and their built-in armor and maybe wings or whatever. They could each have their own little aspects. That could be cool. When we get to the sanctiarchs, we could do that. And so there wouldn't be like groups of dragonkin. You may have like 1 or 2 others, but I think if a dragonkin exists in the realm, it's named and it's canon. Like these would be things that would be very impactful for any sort of storytelling in the realm. These would be big picture people. So I think that's why I'm leaning towards leaving these out of community stuff, because, or at least like the realm events currently, if we do one, it'll be like, hey, we want 1 or 2 more in the realm that have very powerful implications. And so I'll let you guys write about them and come up with their character stories and their backstories and whatever. But I don't think, as far as the race itself goes, I think that's kind of where it'll end up being pretty close to for a while. So that's like an age before time. Then there's like the old races. And so this kind of gets into a little bit closer to where Lord of the Rings, I think, sits, where there was an age before humans were here, or at least where humans were prominent, where elves, dwarves, halflings, giants, and potentially one of your guys' community races existed. So from an age before our own, the few that roam the realm speak of an age of calamity and destruction. So we talked about, I think, like a couple months ago, about how we like the idea, the fantasy. Once again, we're going for experiences and stories. This is what we're aiming towards. We're not just trying to be unique or traditional. We're trying to be somewhere in the middle. But what we're going for is experiences in a fantasy. And one of those things is uncovering hidden knowledge. Obviously, the archive plays a big part in that. And I think one of those things that could help is if there were civilizations and peoples that were here in the realm beforehand. So there's leftover ruins, there's leftover dungeons, potentially leftover castles that have been taken over or overgrown, you know, that sort of imagery. And within those, treasures, relics, tomes, scrolls, magic, you know, these things that are mysterious and entertaining. That's what stories are built off of. Or at least that's the environments that the stories interact with. And it adds a layer of cool stuff. So we also talked about how it's maybe a cycle, like it's not like 100% a cycle, but the reason that there's not a ton of elves and a ton of dwarves, unlike Lord of the Rings, they'll be more rare than Lord of the Rings elves and dwarves, is the fact that there was an age of calamity before the age of peace, before even humans. And so that's why they were almost all wiped out, and the few that remain have been, it's been generations of like myth and legend and stories passed down about calamity, destruction, you know, not like explicitly genocide, but just a total wipeout of their civilizations. And that's where you get these elves and dwarves that are now intermingled with human society on a social level, but they have their own quirks and cultures and histories and legends and stories that inform how they behave. And so they have their own twist. They're not just humans that are short or humans that with pointy ears. Then the classic races, which is like our age. The humans come in, there are very few other people there, they're able to farm, they prosper, they grow their kingdoms, and pretty soon the dwarves, the halflings, the elves, they start assimilating with the culture, and they become part of the kingdom. They become synonymous with the kingdom of men, which is SpireHelm, even though it's led by, you know, sometimes a dragonkin, sometimes a human, who knows. And then there's the new races. This is the Age of Peace has happened, and then all of a sudden the magic comes back into the realm, and we start seeing things that we've never seen before. And these are mysterious beings and cultures, not widely understood, and most operate in their own tribes and communities apart from the kingdom, though some participate or affiliate in small numbers. So this could be gnomes, fairies, merfolk. Orcs could be in this. They could also be in the humans. They could also be in the old races. I'm not married to any one idea yet. And then obviously I think it'd be really cool to have a new community race there. So let me catch up on chat. What do you guys think about that? Does that make sense? Is that conducive to good story and to a good realm? I don't find it too confusing yet, but I'd love to hear your guys' feedback. I think animal folk are too high fantasy, though merfolk, swamp folk seem to be a gray area. Yeah. One hand, I'm not the biggest fan of animal folk races. On the other, I was going to write about a minotaur race. Oh, interesting. Generally, in the first discussion of the event, I thought perhaps merfolk would be elusive and possibly even disputed in world. Yeah, I think that's where like a lot of the new races would fit in. Similar to like how the magic, there's a lot of like veiled magic systems or magic sources, where some of them are like, oh yeah, we've been doing this forever. This is benediction. This is arcanism. We study the stars. And then there are some that it's like wizardry. I don't know about that. That seems kind of like it's borderline. And I think merfolk could be one of those where it's like we really don't know. Like they seem nice, but then when we turn our back, they like eat our sailors and steal our fish. So they may be like it may be just depend on the story and depend on the scenario. I like beast races. I don't want to say no to most of them, but I do think that they're not the best to have at this moment in time. Maybe a further, yeah. And I think if that's the case, we'll probably do it in the new races section. Like if there's any, like, I don't know, it's hard because we want to keep it dark fantasy and not bleed into anything else. Yeah. I do think the biggest problem with the beast folk is that if you add one type of them, why not add more? Yeah. If we were, we'd have to add one beast folk race. That's all animals and it's more random. Yeah. Not too late, Char. We just started like what 10 minutes ago? 32, but we're just getting into the races and stuff. Yeah, so that's why I'm kind of leaning away from. Where was it? Oh, up here. This one I'm kind of leaning away from. It just, I think it would be more confusing. Yeah, like why not just add fox people and wolf people and tiger people and lion people and turtle people and frog people? Then it just kind of gets, then you turn back into Daggerheart essentially, where it's just like you can have anyone. And I think that pulls the needle a little bit further away from dark fantasy, where I think of, there's actually a really good, I think it might have been MCDM or somebody else who was talking about how some game designers try to design their game to be funny and whimsical and like unserious, and it ends up making the game feel more flat because people naturally take D&D or tabletop RPGs in a way that makes them more unserious. Like you're playing with your friends, you end up making jokes and pretending to do funny things even if it's not like the most what the character would do in the world. And so I think if you start with a really grounded, takes itself seriously world, then people will spin it and it will naturally, like, you'll get this gradient at the edges of like, oh yeah, it's kind of funny and there are some funny things happening even though it's not that serious. And I think similarly with the genre, if we stick to kind of more, I don't want to say grimdark or gritty, but more serious dark fantasy, traditional, lowish magic, then people will naturally be gravitated towards the edges. But if we start with everything, then we end up going even further away, and then it feels like generic high fantasy again. So I think, yeah, there may be a place for wolf people, rabbit people, frog people, but I think at its core, if we don't have them, then when they do spring up, it won't be like super crazy. It'll make sense because the rest of it will feel dark fantasy. And when you encounter this one-off strange person that is a wolf man thing, it's like, oh, this makes sense. But if there's an entire culture of wolf people and they all intermingle with society, then it's like, okay, well, isn't this just traditional high fantasy? Like, isn't this what every other IP is doing with their fantasy worlds right now? So I think we should err on the side of safety. And I don't know, safety is maybe not the right word, but we should err on the dark fantasy side. Yeah, noble dark with a sprinkle of grimdark. Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts about history, races, stuff like that? My idea for the dragon people as well. I think I'm still leaning towards the idea that the dragon people are like they have the potential to become beasts and dragons if they lean into ego and pride and corruption and hoarding. If they give into those evils or whatchamacallums, then they can become beasts. And so there are still dragons in the world, and those are seen once again as this mythical sort of like far out thing. Everybody knows in the realm knows what dragons are, but few have seen them, encountered them. In certain regions, you might find more, but I think they're rare. And so the idea that with corruption, a dragonkin could become a beast, a monster, and lose humanity along their way, I think is a fantasy that seems cool and is intricate for storytelling. Um, so that's kind of where I'm leaning with that. I think keeping them extremely rare gives them a weight in the world, instead of just like, yeah, there's just dragon people everywhere and one of them is our king. Um, I think if it feels like most people say, okay, these people are like gifted of the gods, but we also know that they come with an air of danger and power. I think that's pretty cool. Not everybody has to be 100% equal in power out of the gate. I think there's, in most fantasy worlds, there's an inherent, like, elves are gifted with, I mean, a lot of times they're gifted with infinite life and intelligence and learning and this, magic and whatever. And I think the Dragonkin will kind of more represent that in the world than elves will. We've kind of said that we don't really just want our elves to be just immortal humans with pointy ears, because that's kind of what a lot of fantasy ends up going with. Prefix dark with a small helping of prefix dark. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Dragonkin. Yeah, I've been trying to think of some names for Dragonkin. I thought I had landed on. I was gonna do Draconid, and then turns out Dragonid is a World of Warcraft creature. So I was like, well, that didn't work. There was a couple of names that I came to that I was like, this one would work, and then I look it up and it's like, this is a name from a video game or a TTRPG or something. So I don't know. I'm leaning towards I want some cool ancient sounding name for dragon people. Nodder is another name meaning dragon, like in Old English, and then kine or kin or whatever. I've been kind of throwing around some names, but for now, it's not too important yet. They won't be part of this, but I think they won't be part of the realm event. But I think it would be good to have before the realm event so that people know kind of what the boundaries are between, like, these are basically god creatures or divine-ish beings that are more like the elves from Lord of the Rings, like especially the high elves, the Maiar or whatever they are, like Gandalf and Elrond and these people who are Galadriel, who are kind of like these crazy, almost demigod type beings. And then on the other end, you have like your humans, and then there's like this spectrum in between. So I think that'd be helpful, but yeah. How do we plan on balancing the races fitting people's preconceived notions and not feeling derivative of other fantasy projects? That is literally the hardest thing to do. Because like we talked about before, we are trying to find a balance of traditional dark fantasy and also not just riffing entirely off of the backs of what people expect. And that will take a lot of finding a perfect balance to do. So I think that's kind of what I want to go over in this stream is, let's see what we can do with these races that makes them not feel just like generic fantasy, but also just enough like generic fantasy that when people come to SpireHelm, they don't have to learn too much. They don't have to read books to understand. They can read a passage or a fiction or a couple pages and they'll see, oh, this is what makes SpireHelm elves different than Lord of the Rings elves and whatnot. What's the deal with the Bale and Dark One influence on creatures distinction? Oh yeah, start of the stream. Yeah, we just basically, beasts are animals that can reproduce by themselves. They're just natural, even if they are enhanced and bigger. They're still considered beasts, even if they're magically enhanced animals. Bale is creatures that rely on magic for their existence. So ghosts, zombies, mimics, wolves, vampires, or werewolves, vampires, etc. And within Bale, you have forces of the darkness, lurkers, demons. These are ones that explicitly are either created by the Dark One or serve him directly, and they will have their own visual aesthetic that's more clear than just the other Bales that do derive from dark magic that probably comes from the Dark One, but they don't necessarily know that they serve the Dark One. They are just there to enact their, hunger or their chaos or whatever. So that's kind of the TLDR. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about let's do some work here. How many races? A format. I guess I don't know which one of these is more important to tackle first. I feel like these are both very, very important things to distinguish before we really get started. Sorry, I'm just thinking here. I think how many races is probably a little bit more important. So let's try to get this one figured out first. So Dragonkin will be, I'll keep developing in the back or on some live streams and stuff, and we'll keep talking about it, but I'm kind of okay with where it's at right now. Humans, I think we don't need to talk about because those are their own thing. However, depending on where the fantasy goes within this realm event, we could let people touch on humans. Elf, dwarf, halfling, extra. Do we do any unaffiliated races? Or do we do none? And if we do some, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? That's a lot. I don't know. I want once again, it's about finding the balance. Good design. I want the realm event to be big enough and have enough variety that people feel like they can find their own niche, like we did with the Valenholds. People were like, I am really drawn to the Maw, I'm really drawn to the Fjord, I'm going to write about that, or I'm drawn to both, and I want to write about 2 of them. And there were people who were all in on each one of the 4, which was awesome. It was perfect. I want something similar for this, but I also don't want too many where we get potentially one that has no submissions, because last time we got about 12 or 11 submissions. And I also don't want people to feel like they have to write multiple, or if they do write multiple, that it'll be, I don't want people writing 3 or 4 maybe. 2 I think is fine. 3 maybe if you feel like it, but if you're going to write 1 for all 7, that's a lot. With how much we plan to shape the new races, we definitely have to touch on their original symbolism of the races in Tolkien's world. Yeah, I agree. We don't want to stray too much. We also want our own spin on it. Yeah, I think that's important. Because we don't want to just become too Brandon Sandersonized, where it's like we need a whole history and all these different things. I think it's better if we stick to the world is as it is, and the mystery, the crux of what SpireHelm is about, isn't really about intricate race histories and genealogies. It's more about the happenings in the realm, the story. But a good story pulls from history and cultures and stuff like that to make it meaningful. Obviously, can't have one without the other. But the stories aren't going to be principally about the races, the histories, and whatever. No, it's not a TTRPG, but we could start with races that would be playable if it were a TTRPG. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. I think as someone who really loves game design, I almost always am thinking about that with SpireHelm. So I think that's definitely a really good way of looking at it. Because I think I agree. What races would be playable if you were a player? That really comes down to what peoples are versus other things. So we probably don't need merfolk. Probably won't have fairies. Gnomes, maybe. But I mean, halfling. I mean, I think the distinction between halfling and gnome, for me, is like magic. Halflings are, like, while humans are magical in the same way that elves and dwarves are magical, I think, just to the humans, they are normal. But they have some things that maybe the elves and dwarves don't have, and the elves have some things in magic and whatever. But I think to all of them, the gnomes are from magic. They are these creatures of whimsy, and they can travel, and they've got all this like connection to magic and whatever that humans, elves, and dwarves don't have. Same with fairies, merfolk, swamp folk. And I think giants, if we put them, giants are kind of in that really slim border between beast and human or peoples, where some giants would be barbaric and like straight up evil, and other giants may be friendly and completely colloquial and whatever. So, um, so is this event going to be focused on a small amount of main races like the classics of fantasy? Yeah, I think so. And then we'll probably have a separate realm event for other magical beings that are more on the edges of civilization. But I think this one will mostly deal with who is in the kingdom or who is of importance to the kingdom. Because I think, for the most part, the kingdom doesn't care too much what's happening with the fairy villages or, you know, little gnome civilizations or the merfolk in the ocean, as long as they're not interfering with their own things. It's not necessarily that the travelers, the people of the kingdom, don't have experiences with them. If you're traveling in the woods, you're going to come across a fairy village, you're going to come across gnomes. If you're in the ocean, you're going to run into merfolk. But it's that the main people in society of the kingdom aren't necessarily talking about them. That's where orcs is kind of in that middle ground. If we're going with the orcs are a tribal group of people, that is, some tribes are way more aggressive than others, and some tribes are way more barbaric and or civil than others, they kind of blur the line. Some orcs may just say, I'm out of the tribes entirely. I'm just going to participate in the kingdom because it's easier. I can make a good living. I make a good mercenary. I'm employable on a boat because I can pull ropes really hard or whatever. And others may say, no, my tribe is my people, and you have stuff that we want, and we will fight you. So I think orcs are kind of that really borderline. They're kind of right on that blurred line. So I don't know. Gonna have canon gnomes, yeah. I don't think that SpireHelm is a story to have a creation myth. Yeah, I think each of the own would have their own creation myths, but I don't think there would be one creation myth that the entire kingdom subscribes to. I think it would be the Venerants, and each person sees the Venerants in a different way, and whatever. I think that we do need a history on why they're in the kingdom, and that should be enough with the fantasy we're going with. Yeah, that'd be a good idea for the submissions, actually. You should make a definitive creation myth of the races. Give at least a starting point from where they could have come from. Yeah, I don't know, because I think it goes back to that, like, do we just say, well, we don't really know anything? Because that's kind of, it is a cop-out, but at the same time, it's very helpful if what we're going for is a realm of mystery and not complete understanding, where Tolkien's world, the dwarves and the elves were very careful and meticulous. The Silmarillion, I think, could be wrong about this, is kind of about the creation myth around the elves and their previous wars and the ancient histories. I don't think that's the fantasy that SpireHelm is meant to embody. I think that's too hard for the type of project we're trying to do because it's so collaborative. I think erring on the side of mystery and lost knowledge is better and easier and will be better for the community than trying to narrow down and really establish some really hard historical facts, if that makes sense. I think some stuff is better defined than other stuff, which I think would be better to have more ambiguous. But there could be, within the elves, I think part of it would be if you are writing a submission for elves, you get to, in a way, spin off your own, maybe not creation myth, but your own myth of the realm, like where they fit in, where they came from, kind of thing. If not, it's like I don't think it'd be like a world creation myth, but maybe something along the lines. And they don't have to be, these are legend and myth. They don't have to be 100% like plausible or fit in perfectly with everything else. The dwarves may say they were the first. The elves may say they were the first. Obviously, that's, you know, a kind of traditional fantasy thing is like, who does the realm belong? In Lord of the Rings, it's kind of the elves. And man are just kind of there. But the elves are also leaving. So man is kind of to take their place. I don't know. It's interesting, but I think the type of fantasy, the stories we want to tell, that sort of thing, I think is a little bit different than Lord of the Rings. So I don't know if a solid creation myth would be super helpful. That being said, there are some really awesome things that you can draw upon. Like in Lord of the Rings, there are Elendil is like the light. I think it's Venus, maybe. They have the same stars as us. But there's like this morning star and these creation myths that are written into the stars so that people from different cultures understand the same things, and you can use that for symbolism and storytelling. That's really cool. It's also really complex. Tolkien spent his whole life on it. Most of us are spending, a couple months writing a story, maybe. So the scope is different. But I don't know if that kind of answers your question. Blah blah blah. Teocentric story. What does teocentric mean? Theocentric? Oh, yeah, God is the central focus. Theocentric. I see, I see. Yeah. Yeah, it's more the forces of magic and mysticism that rule the realm. Even though there are these gods, they're less present. Blah, blah, blah. What I'm thinking is a good idea to have guidance. The bound holds, for one thing, as long as you get to write, get a to write and not to write, specifically what you're looking for. Yeah. Assume that's already in the plan because the bound holds other guidance. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is like, don't spend your entire thing writing about the history and the creation myth for elves. Yeah. But do a little bit of it, sprinkle it in there or whatever. I think that's where we'll get to in format, which will probably be the next thing we cover. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is 6 too many? So if we did this, if we just did these races right here for the realm event, would that be too few, too many? I'm sure we won't get a 100% answer. Some people are going to want 15. Some people are going to want 2. So, but I get the feeling that this will be the most helpful, but also this is kind of the default. Like these are very traditional races, but we're also sprinkling in, hey, here's some extra, and here's an extra. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So no humans, no dragonkin, no giants, because I think giants are like the opposite of orcs almost. They don't participate in any formal society, but they could be they could be compatible and symbiotic with other tribes in the north and whatever, or wherever in the realm. But they also are small communities of 5 to 15 to 20 giants at the biggest, probably, not orcs, which are in the hundreds, and a lot of them do mingle into society potentially. Dragonkin, why not? This is probably going to be like I don't know how to explain it, like the rare race. Yeah, they're probably gonna be something more later. As of right now, there's like 6 known dragonkin people, which is kind of where I'm leaning towards. Is like, to see one is to see the Venerants. We talked about history a little bit. If you want to try to read all of this before I scroll back up, but yeah, they're from an age before time itself, and to create one with an egg or whatever is difficult. It either requires heavy amounts of magic, or I guess a dragonkin fun time. So I don't really know exactly. I haven't classified that yet, but as of right now, I'm thinking if there were ancient eggs or whatever, Aletheus birthed or like incubated 5 of them to become the Sanctiarchs, and so they don't necessarily like reproduce. They are like these kind of immortal-ish beings. They're the closest thing to like immortal beings in the realm that there are. So they'll be kind of their own thing, and with that comes like a sense of regality and power and whatever. Anyways, we'll get into that later, but I think that'll be like a live stream type of thing that we bounce back and forth. I don't think it'll be its own realm event specifically. Okay, 6 is all right. 7 is a bit too many. Yeah, 6 is good. Anything over is pushing it. Humans are already assumed to exist. Yeah, so kind of in like this this history thing. Get the old races. So this is from an age before our own. The few that roam the realm speak of an age of calamity and destruction. So they have their own kind of destruction myth, which is canonically, if the Dark One was there in the age of this war against the gods or whatever, the elves, dwarves, halflings, and giants were almost wiped out entirely, which is why they're so rare. And their communities were so disparaged that the realm like basically fell back into, this early middle age, late middle age, whatever it is. And within that, the humans creep in this realm post-destruction, and they just kind of start farming, they start building society, they start building kingdoms and whatever, until Farillion or whatever bands the kingdoms of men together into one unified SpireHelm kingdom. And elves, dwarves, and halflings and giants are so small in comparison number-wise that they just start to participate in society. They start to partake in trade and governance and whatever, and they become synonymous with man. When people refer to man, it's just, yeah, elves, dwarves, halflings, humans, and whatever extra race we come up with in the community event, which will be really awesome. Giants kind of keep to their own, and orcs also are kind of in this. I think orcs. I don't really know where we decided orcs are going to end up. If they're new, or if they're classic, or if they're old. We should probably talk about that a little bit, but I'm kind of good with them being anywhere. And then the classic races, yeah, humans come in. They kind of just prosper in this realm of awesomeness, even though they have their own wars and pestilence and plague and whatever. And then there's Verlian establishes SpireHelm, and then you get this era of peace, and then the magic comes back, and that's where gnomes and fairies, merfolk, potentially orcs, and other races come in, and they're these new things like the Ignispecs. They kind of have spawned in from this magic, good or evil magic, doesn't, whatever. And they begin to participate in society or not. And I think if we had one that does and one that doesn't, I think that'd be a fun distinction. And that way, when people see a picture of a, like we said, we think about it like a tabletop RPG. When we see a party of 6 people or 5-group party, we'll see a human, a dwarf, an elf, an orc, and some other creature. And when people see that image, they'll go, ah, it's SpireHelm, because it's got this looking elf, this looking dwarf, this looking orc, and this creature that doesn't exist in other fantasy or is a spin-off of a other colloquially known, fantasy creature. So, stops us from spreading things too thin if we do 6, resulting in submission for each. Yeah. Giants live in the far north, beyond the map, mostly. Yeah, that could be really cool. I think I agree there. Humans aren't to be touched on. Yeah, I think just humans is as classic as we get it. We leave it there because some people, once again, like, it's hard. Like, I always think about TTRPGs because that's where, like, people create stories for fun. Most people probably won't write a book for SpireHelm, but a good majority of people may actually play, a Dungeons and Dragons style campaign at home set in SpireHelm because it's fun and it might create some story that they want to write about. I think coming into it and just knowing humans are just the fantasy humans, that's kind of what they always are. But I think doing anything else kind of runs you into science fiction territory where it's like, well, then what is, like, what makes a human? If it's not a human, then what is it? So I think humans are your traditional medieval fantasy humans. They are building kingdoms, they're doing trade, they're farming, they're doing whatever, and they're interacting with the others. Okay. Rip pasta. Okay, have fun, Char. Sorry, I'm probably already out of here, but have a good one. Okay. Age of Awesomeness, yeah. Okay, so maybe I should get this open. Boink. Flashbang. Let's do Spirefolk of the Kingdom. Where is my... How did I get into this? Does anybody know how to get out of this read-only view? Ah, there it is. Escape. Found it. Title. Middle. Awesome. The humans aren't part of the realm event. What do we do for the compendium? Would not include them. I think we can write like our own thing for it. And I'm not entirely against excluding them or including them in the realm event. I think it would just be, you would write specifically about some cultures or regions or the creation myth, not the creation myth way, but like the founding myth, basically, like why the humans are there. And maybe it could get difficult because then we kind of have to decide, well, when did the humans get there? Was it Bronze Age? Was it Iron Age? Like, I don't really know exactly. I don't really want to get into having it have to work out perfectly because then it kind of narrows in some stuff. And SpireHelm's not really about that sort of science fiction-y. Tolkien went really, really into depth, and I don't think that's really what we're trying to do here. So I'm okay kind of leaving that out, but we might allow people to say, hey, if you don't really feel inspired to write about all these races, then you can totally write about humans or something else. Imps and goblins, yeah. Yeah, I think those will kind of fall into. I think goblins will be kind of the. Once again, like we want people to be able to find traditional dark fantasy things in SpireHelm without everything being twisted and turned into our own spin on things. And so if they want to come here and have a human hero who fights goblins, that should be something that they can find in SpireHelm, or that would fit, because that's what traditional dark fantasy is about. A cave with goblins, and there's a hoard of treasure and some creature that they worship as their like cult leader, whatever. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I don't remember how the last one. Maybe I should open up the last one. Valenholds. I don't remember which page. The Valenholds. Okay. Strongholds was a fantasy. Okay, so this will be. Yeah, we'll do that. Spirefolk of the Kingdom. This tab will be the races. And then, what do we have? What is the fantasy? We might need that own section again, potentially. I think it helps, especially for new people, since there may be people who weren't here for the last Realm event that are wanting to participate in this one, because I think a good number of people. I think there are lots of different genres of creative writing and creating, period, that people look for and are hoping for in SpireHelm. And I think we're on a pretty good rotation right now. If we do, we have the Valenholds, which is more logistical and architectural with some storytelling. Environmental storytelling is really what the Valenholds are about. This one's more historical, cultural storytelling, what makes humans humans, what makes elves elves. And that's a very unique thing that I think some people who didn't participate in the last Realm event will be like, I am locked into this one because this is my cup of tea. And then I think in the future we'll have the Forces of Darkness, which is kind of like, how crazy can your brain go, potentially? What kind of monsters and horrors can you come up with? That's its own genre. And then beyond that, we'll have the characters, like the named like people of import in the realm. So lords, I don't know, diplomats, traders, merchants, storytellers, whatever. These people of that the realm understands and knows and are important in storytelling. And that's its own sort of fantasy creative writing experience that I think other people look towards. And so I think if we kind of go on that cycle, or at least something close, as long as we're not doing like environmental storytelling 5 times in a row, I think we're on a good track for SpireHelm. So this one will be fun. I want to keep these. The reason I'm referencing this one is because I want to keep it similar. Like I don't want people to look at this Realm event and go, I don't even understand what's happening. That doesn't mean I won't change anything. I probably will, because I think we can do better than what I did last time. But I do want some things to be similar, so when people know where to go to find certain things and not completely overhaul it every single time. But I wasn't mad with the last one. What is this? What's the goal? Keep in mind, whatever. Okay, so let's go to the races page. Let's do races, peoples, races of the realm. This is a title. So we got apart from humans who remain the most prosperous and this is probably a little bit zoomed out, huh? Is that better? Okay, that's probably a decent-ish intro for now. Pale orcs, yeah. We're not assimilating Godling into SpireHelm. I don't even know what that is. Orcs make them yellow, not green. I don't even know what that is. Okay, so we've got elves. Is elves trademarked? I want to say if it's spelled with a V or same with dwarves. Is elves trademarked? Elf or elf cannot be trademarked or copyrighted because it's pre-existing. However, specific names drow, elf, elf. I think let's see. Dwarves trademark. I don't think they are. Let's check Quora and see. Not copyright. Okay. Hobbit. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So dwarves is now carries a fantasy specific connotation instead of the medical condition of small people, where dwarf with an F is yeah, more associated with dwarfism, and same with elves versus elf. Okay, so I think we're good. Yeah, elves. Yeah, I think elves is like Christmas elves. Is that even how you spell elves? Elves? That looks wrong. Elves, dwarves. Do we do halflings? It's halfling trademarked. There's another one. Whoops. Is halfling trademarked? Halfling is not trademarked. It is a traditional English and Scotic folklore term dating back to centuries that is free for public use. Perfect. Awesome, because that's what people are going to expect to find. Once again, we can come up with our own names for these things. We should just colloquially at least have some amount of communication where even if the elves themselves call them something different, the humans may just call them elves and dwarves and halflings, even if the halflings call themselves hobbits or polders or what does D&D call a halfling? I think they just call them halfling. Gnomes, halfling. We were talking about how gnomes would be like the enchanted version of a halfling, where they would be like they'd be the new creatures in the realm since the magic has come back. There are now gnome societies and villages popping up in the woods. Um, and there may be some gnomes that interact with human society, but probably not at like a wide scale kingdom size level. So yeah, and maybe halflings and gnomes get along great. I imagine gnomes are smaller than halflings. So if a halfling is hobbit sized, a gnome is like could run around on my table, my desk, and is like as tall as this water bottle type of thing. That's what I picture for a gnome. Once again, SpireHelm can do its own thing, but that's like kind of where I'm. That's what I picture. But it also could just be a halfling that is more enchanted, more like a Smurf than anything. So, um, orc, orc. Once again, I don't know if orc or orc is trademarked. Orc is not trademark. Public during term while J.R. Tolkien popularized many modern fantasy orcs. Okay, so orc with a K is for Warhammer, Urukai. Okay. Yeah, I think orc. Orc. Perfect. New community race. So, let's do. So I think these would be considered spire folk. People of the kingdom that participate in widespread trade, government, and community within Valen holds and the great city. Can I not? Oh, there it is. Okay. Community race. Oh, this is kind of boring stuff. What do we call the others? Others. Probably need like a name for these other people. Spirefolk seems a little big. Go ahead and two. We'll call them others for now. Other races. I can't hit this key to save my life. So this would be, yeah, Wildlanders could be a good one. Yeah. Other groups of peoples who live in the wildlands or outside of generally outside the walls the kingdom, though they may interact or participate on a small scale, the bulk of their peoples lives apart from SpireHelm itself. Is that a bad way to word that? Their people live, yeah. The bulk of their peoples live apart, yeah. Yeah, we could call them Wildlanders. I'm not opposed to that. Wildlanders. Spirefolk and Wildlanders. It's kind of a mouthful. I mean, Wildland is a mouthful. I mean, you can really just say Wildlands if you want. Wildlanders, Wildlanders, whatever. It's just a slightly more, I don't know, Germanic, Norse, Old English way to, a sounding way to say it. Other groups of people who live in the Wildlands or generally outside the walls of the kingdom. Because, I mean, the Wildlands is just a general term for anything outside the walls, but they don't necessarily have to be like deep in the woods. They could also just be, you know, around the area or out on the islands of the sea. So, Wildlands is peak. I do like the name. Yeah. Should we limit one? So I think this will be a much smaller scale than the Valen holds. In some ways, like you don't have to do as much heavy lifting as the Valen holds, I think, did, because environmental storytelling requires a lot of context and stuff. So I'd be totally okay, and I think a lot of people will end up writing about 2, maybe 3, instead of the last one being 1, maybe 2. Given, if you guys want to collaborate on huge stuff, then I'm also okay with that. Should we limit the amount of community races to 1 per person, per group? I don't really know how we would do that. But like, do you write either a Wildlander race or a Spirefolk race, and then you get your pick of, do I want to do an orc, a dwarf, elf? Like you could do elves, dwarves, and this one, or you could do orc, halfling, and a community race or something. Or do we just say, do whatever? If you want to write 1 Spirefolk race and 1 Wildland race, go for it. Once again, I'd feel bad if people don't write anything on like I don't want people to get their feelings hurt if stuff doesn't work. This may be a harder one to merge ideas from. However, we also have the benefit of cultures within races, like we do in, you have the wood elves, and then you have the, I don't know, the high elves type of thing. And so if one person writes about a certain type of dwarf and another one about a different one, we could just say we can take both ideas and they are just their own separate cultures. Yours are from the north and yours are from the east. I don't know. I don't want people to get their feelings hurt if they don't get picked. But I think with the community races, we are going to have to say we get one per each. I don't, as far as I'm thinking right now, like I don't know how you would combine lizard folk with a four-armed monkey race. Like that's just, you can't, it's going to be really hard to merge the community races. These, I think, if there's multiple ideas for halflings, I think it's a lot easier because you can just kind of, like I said, put it into cultures. Yeah, that'll be hard. I know ties. I didn't want to have to do a tie. I was so like heartbroken. I still haven't. I don't know if you guys have come to a conclusion, by the way, for the Burl Deep. I've been meaning to like check up on it again and give my feedback because I think there are very specific elements I really liked from the treasury stuff, and there are other elements I really liked from the whalers, and so, or the warriors. But I also think that some of them would work better, like the treasury one. I think would work better if it just got a little bit shrunk, the scale, the scope, to like 3. Because I don't remember exactly how many Joe had, how many different free fleets, I think he called them. There were, I want to say there was like 7 by the end. And I was like, man, if you just brought it back to just those original 3 and just shrunk things down a little bit, I think that would be more easier to handle and a little bit less high fantasy when it comes to like scale and scope and stuff. But at the same time, I really liked the idea of the warriors kind of, their magic encounters with other pirate type enemies. Anywho, that's a tangent, but yeah, I don't want to do any more ties if possible. I'd rather have like this is the foundation. Other stuff can kind of be Frankensteined in if people want, and that will be a question on the new. There will be 2 questions. It'll be, are you okay with your ideas being Frankensteined in a little bit? And then the other question will be, are you okay with other ideas being Frankensteined into yours, or would you rather keep yours pure as is and not collaborate more after the fact? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 fleets right now. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking like 3 to 5 would be cool, but I also like uneven amounts make it things more fun because then there's always an imbalance. Like if 2 of them, if it splits, then there's never a perfect balance. But at the same time, 6, 4, totally fine numbers. Or it could just be 2, and there could be like, they could come from like the north of the bay and the south of the bay, and they could have their own little cultures and rivalry. Like, I'm open to ideas. I don't want to just shoot down everything because I feel like it should be one way. I just think that when I was reading it, I was like, this seems a little grand and a little bit big, but I really like the principle. Like the core of the design was perfect. Like it was great the way it was. Yeah, there's a good number, none are defined. The fact that there are many is more important than each being fleshed out. Yeah, that's fair. Burl Deep as a foundation, added the free fleets and treasury and Merigium and the treasurer to it. Yeah, and made a new poem. We're going to write new fiction writing section to try to include both things. Yeah, I think that's perfect. Yeah, Burl Deep is like, yeah, the foundation, but the ideas in the treasury and the free fleet I think is a really good idea, which is really cool. The other thing I thought of that could be a good reason why the treasury is there, just an idea for you, Joe and Ollie and those working on it, is shipping stuff downriver is really easy. Shipping stuff back upriver is a lot harder. And if you're shipping gold downriver, getting it back up, the weight in gold and metals and gems and stuff is ridiculously hard to get back up. So there may just be a reason that SpireHelm was like, you know what? We're at the bottom of everyone else, like the maw and the river. Like, you guys send stuff to us and it's pretty easy, but to get it down from the bay all the way back up, like you're kind of the end of the road. So let's just keep all of the gold and stuff, like a good chunk of it there, and just stop trying to send it back up because like they almost have their own like fiat currency of like I owe you this, you owe me this, and we only send the minimal amounts we need. We don't send like full shipments of tax and trade and stuff. That could be a reason that the bay has it. But I mean, you'd run into the same issue with trying to get stuff back up to the maw. But I think just maybe the steepness or the rushingness of the river. Like the rivers get more powerful as they go down, but also at the same time they get wider and maybe easier to traverse upward. I actually don't know the science behind it. It's not about that. It's not about the science. But I think it could be a cool concept of like, it was too hard to ship all the gold back, so we just kept it here, and now we use it as this, you know, this payment for these free fleets and stuff. So yeah, you guys come up with whatever you think is good. That was just my main feedback from it, was like, don't make it too grand, like the Roman Colosseum type crazy huge spectacle, but also I think if there's a place for it, that's the place for it. So do with that what you will, but you guys get the free control there. I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Rivers get easier to traverse the further down you go. Okay, so yeah, that makes everything I just said kind of backwards, which does make sense because I mean, the smaller the river, the more it's going to be like falling over like rocks and waterfalls and stuff, and the closer it gets to the bay, it's going to just kind of like open up and become this almost like an inlet. So maybe that's not a great reason, but there doesn't need to be a reason. It's fantasy. It's not that type of thing. Okay, let's get back to races and peoples. In my old Poor SpireHelm project, had a whole thing about the break and the bulk. The further up you go, the more features like deep valleys and waterfalls. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So I think I'm happy with where we're at. These 6. Orcs, halflings, dwarves, elves. And 1 extra here and 1 extra here. Do we think we need a... I don't want to influence you guys in one way or another of like what I've been thinking about, but what would these be? Like trying to come up with something entirely new is pretty difficult. I mean, if you think about elves, they're kind of these immortal beings. Dwarves are kind of short. Halflings are kind of short. You could go the opposite direction and go kind of tall and have these like tall creatures. I'm not opposed to having some sort of other fantasy type of race like the Ent people, like tree people or other things. I don't know. I'm saying this all to say, do we need a page on here? What is the fantasy? Do we want some sort of, here's some guidance of like, here's some inspiration points you could take from, or some ideas, some fantasies that could be filled? Because I think that's really what the what I wanted to talk about here. Where is my ideas are all over the places. All over the places. It's not even a thing. Yeah, what fantasy does each race fill? Basically boiled down to what is being an orc about. So let's just do what is the fantasy. Because we could do like just, hey, here's some things to consider, but I think that's different than here are some like actual, I don't know. Yeah, tree or animal folk would work for Worldlanders. Yeah, that would probably be the best place to put it. That would make the most sense. So what role, what fantasy does each race fill? And basically, what is being a blank about? Yeah, lizard folk, there'd be a lot of overlap with dragon folk. I think the difference would be like dragon folk would have fire breath, potentially innate magical powers, you know, basically like metal hardened scales, like this otherworldly material of dragon scales that is impenetrable. Whereas lizard folk would just be these soft skinned reptile, you know, maybe poisonous or venomous, but not like breathe fire, fly, that sort of thing. So I think there could be a pretty good visual distinction. And I'm leaning more towards all the dragon people are gold or some gold-ish color, so like a reddish gold or a bluish gold or whatever, like a metallic. I think the lizard people would be your typical like gecko, iguana, like the kind of matte colored. So you'd look at them and you'd go, I know that's a lizard folk, not a dragon folk. But they may either correctly or incorrectly claim some sort of divine heritage from the dragons of ancient times and whatever. So that could be That could be cool. Yeah, they could almost kind of look the same. And I think like the dragons would have horns and potentially wings, and the lizard folk would be more lanky and just kind of have claws and smaller, like the small scales and whatever. So we could make them visually distinct enough that they wouldn't look the same. And I also think the dragon folk would be big, like they'd probably be the largest creatures. Like that once again, we're going for that fantasy of what would a demigod look like in a fantasy world, and that's kind of the closest thing we get to is like a 9 foot tall dragon beast with a like just perfectly unscratchable armor and almost glowing because it's so brilliant. And then like your lizard people could be maybe even shorter than normal humans or about the same size, and maybe they crawl on all fours often, and then they'll like kind of pop up like a meerkat, like the lizard people from the Volcano Manor in Elden Ring. That could be like kind of the more the direction they take it in. I think a lizard people would be awesome. I would love if I could participate in this, I'd probably end up writing lizard people just because I love reptiles and I think they're really fun. And it adds once again, what fantasy does each race fill? I think the lizard people fill this like almost goblin-esque, like there's the conniving, cunning serpent that kind of like I don't know, they're like a little bit maniacal and whatever. So I think that's a cool fantasy to fill. Where I don't think we have, the orcs are traditionally these barbaric, um, tribal sort of. They fill that kind of fantasy. Um, and the elves fill this like high noble, and the dwarves are this industrial like mining and whatnot. So I don't know. We could figure that out. Lizard folk could be like our kobolds. Yeah, I think kobolds. I'm trying to remember exactly what makes a kobold a kobold. Oh, they're actually from Germanic folklore. I didn't know that. I thought they were Dungeons and Dragons original. I was thinking more like troglodyte. But then again, troglodyte is such a broad term that I actually don't know what it's turned into. I'm thinking troglodyte from like Cult of the Reptile God, from like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, like this guy over here, off to the right. Like that's what I think of when I think of like lizard folk, like almost fish. That one could be kind of similar, but I'm not thinking of like this. That's not really what I think of when I think of troglodyte. Like this is pretty close. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the definition of troglodyte is. Cave dweller. Troglodyte is a human cave dweller from Greek. Okay, so that doesn't really help. I thought troglodyte inherently meant that they were reptilian in nature because that's what I assumed. My first encounter with troglodytes was from Against the Cult of the Reptile God. This is like my go-to starting adventure whenever I run a new D&D for people who have never played D&D. This is kind of like that lizard creature thing, and they worship a spirit naga snake lady, kind of like Medusa, named Explictica Dephilus. And anyways, super cool, old adventure. But so yeah, so this is probably something we should ask ourselves, maybe before the realm event happens, maybe after, or maybe it's part of the. It's either we should think about it beforehand and say, if you're going to be writing about dwarves, we want it to fill this purpose. That way we don't have this overlap of, hey, we have all these races that fill this one niche and we've left out all of these other fantasies that people want to have. Or we just say, hey, just consider it and make sure that you write into that for a good design. Like Joe said, it helps if you think about writing for a TTRPG because that's kind of where this would become applicable because you're going to be writing stories and you want certain characters to fill certain aspects of that story. So, let me catch up on chat. Dragon folk, lizard folk, okay. Treants were added, might actually break my vocal cords by screaming. Color differentiation would be cool. Dryads over, yeah, what makes a dryad? Is that just like a forest folk? Dryad. Oh yeah, like a dryad, yeah. Like kind of like these kind of plant spirits sort of things. Yeah, I think dryads are really cool. Could definitely fit, especially the woodlanders. Like kind of becomes our own like wood elf in a way, more than like an elf with a V. It's more like a wood elf with an F. Whimsical magical creatures, so that could be cool. But treants are also cool, and maybe our unique spin on dryads and treants is that there is some sort of in between, or that if they are, going back to this thing, if they are of these new races, then they could be they could be derivative of magic coming back into the realm in a widespread, like growing magic sort of thing, and therefore they could look different. You could have a really wide range of looking, some that look way more like people and like these leaf flower girly things, and you could also have like Treebeard, who's like, it doesn't, like he sits, like their Ignispex is like one of their own treants that like just sits in the middle and is like rooted into the ground and can't move and just sleeps all the time, and people just burn stuff for him until, if they burn the right thing, it like gives them some prophecy. Or maybe he's not an Ignispex, maybe he's just some other sort of wizard or, you know, sorcerer or prophet of some kind. So I'm not opposed to like that either. If people want to take certain things and spin them off, I think this is the place. The community races are the ways to do that. Is the place to go. We're going to kind of break the rules a little bit of traditional fantasy and put our own spin on things. It's just important that you know, am I writing for somebody who is participating often and widespread in trade, government, community, Valenholds, whatever? Or am I writing something that is its own thing and participates here and there? You may have a villager or a merchant in a city that is of an orc or other Wodlander background, but they are not like considered peoples of the kingdom. So I think that's just a distinction to make. Blah, 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 blah. Lizard folk, troglodyte also applies to chimpanzees. Let's see, kobolds are mainly a D&D thing. I think kobold is trademarked by Wizards of the Coast. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, lizard folk or dryads could also be part of the beast submissions. Yeah, like I could also see lizard folk being more under the right bottom over here. Swamp folk, gnomes, fairies, giants, like these, like yeah, they exist and they somewhat participate in society, or at least they're encounterable, and you could probably have an amicable. They're not just a wild animal; they are somewhere in between. But yeah, they may be more, you know, wild than an orc or this other thing. Like I said, I think orcs are the closest thing from these, you know, wild races that we get to societies. But I think generally they are their own thing. But I think these ones are almost entirely their own thing, and very rarely would they participate in, you know, high society, so to speak. Okay. Here's an idea. Submissions are not for a race, but for a fantasy fulfillment, like forest hunting race. That could be good, because I think that helps. My only thought with that is, if the submissions were broken up into fantasy hunting, like your traditional elves, cave dwelling, you know, gems and ore, and farming or whatever, like if we were to go Lord of the Rings, hobbits, dwarves, elves, if we were to do that, we may end up getting submissions that are, we may end up getting 3 submissions for forest hunting race that are elves, dwarves, and halflings, and then we may only have 1 for another, and so you end up kind of having 3 different races that all fulfill the same purpose, instead of each race fulfilling their same purpose. And then you'd kind of have to, I could see that becoming a little bit complicated, but maybe I'm misunderstanding the idea. But I think the idea of what fantasy fulfillment they are for is super important and should be, like, it should be somewhere. And I don't know if I'm leaning towards, we probably should want to define a little bit beforehand, kind of like we did with the Valenholds, like, hey, this Valenhold is kind of about X, and this Valenhold is kind of about Y. It may be helpful to just say, hey, elves are a little bit about X and dwarves are a little bit about Y, and depending on which of these fantasy fulfillments inspires you the most, write about that, and try to, instead of trying to shoehorn halflings into being this forest hunting race, just go with elves or orcs. And maybe we give 2 or 3 per each. So that way we end up with nothing too defined, like you still have some choice. Because that's really what I don't want to do. I don't want to just limit choice and I'm going to come up with everything by myself and you guys just get to write a poem. I think that's pretty boring. But yeah. We have three kinds of dwarves and no elves. Who cares? I If we have three kinds of dwarves, that's fine. But if we have no elves and only three kinds of dwarves and no halflings, that's kind of where I'm like, then it's become kind of like dwarf and human land instead of just like a dark fantasy. You lose some of the traditional, like what people are coming here for. I feel like you would lose a little bit. But I'm not opposed to having multiple types of dwarves and whatnot. And so maybe, yeah, this is just where the difficult design comes in. Like, what is the most productive thing we can do that facilitates the best of both world of all the things we're going for, which is really we want to have just enough traditional stuff going on, and maybe that's probably what is the fantasy, and then probably just what are our goals. Let's just name this goals. We'll go quests and fantasy. What are our goals? We'll just throw some ideas out here. Just familiar, just unique enough. SpireHelm's own. Let's see. Halflings should be as good bakers and farmers as dwarves are miners and smiths and elves are sorcerers and archers. That's cool. Aren't all the old races at the core the kids of refugees from the fall of other kingdoms? Or are we throwing that away? I think so. I kind of like they're the descendants of, or okay, yeah, because we talked about either they're refugees coming in from other kingdoms that are being destroyed, or they are an older generation that existed in the same realm previously. And I think I lean towards the second more, mostly just because it lends itself to other fantasy tropes we want to have, like exploring ancient ruins and dungeons full of magical artifacts from unknown ages with mysterious languages that have been lost, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That sort of thing, I think by putting the races here as a remnants of an age past fulfills that fantasy easier than refugees from current falling kingdoms. So that's kind of where I'm leaning towards in that way, Holly. So I think we may be throwing out the refugees, but there also could be refugees, and it kind of depends on your broad definition of kingdom. Like I said, this is a very small region of the world. This is not like Tolkien's huge world. So, or many other fantasy ones that are even bigger. So I don't really know exactly. There could be some combination of both. They could also be coming in from other places. And like the giants are kind of coming in from the north. You could have, troglodytes coming in from the south kind of thing. So I don't know. But I think that could kind of be up to each own submission. Maybe have a live stream to make the key races and the event is for unique ones. Could be. But I think it'd also be fun to let people do both. And I think that's kind of what I would encourage. It's not a hard rule, but I would encourage this event to be, hey, write your own in a way, but also write one of the take a stab at the cultures behind the elves, the dwarves, and the halflings. The only reason I wouldn't want to do an entire event for just community races is because we don't want to end up with a ton. Because of the nature of the world and the realm, I think that actually just brought something to my attention that I hadn't thought of before. Let me read Ollie's quote or chat right after this, because I was thinking we don't want new people, because this is a growing project and it's only going to grow. We're at 30-ish active people and like 1,000 interested people, or whatever 30K people on TikTok that have at least liked the project or the idea of it. And of those people, we've got like 30 people that are in here often, really actively participating, and we probably have 50 or more people who are just kind of lurking and just kind of watching what's happening right now and don't want to participate yet, which is totally fine. But there's a good chance that at a certain point they go, you know what, I'm going to take a stab at this. And there's a good chance that the people who liked my original TikTok and then haven't touched the project since will then come back in a few months and go, I missed everything. Where are we at? And if it's like, oh, we have a huge list of community built races and peoples, that's overwhelming, and they may leave the project again because they don't want to have to do all the reading. So I'd rather it be, hey, you know elves, we have a unique twist on elves. You know dwarves, we have a unique twist on dwarves. You know halflings, we have a unique twist on halflings. You know orcs, whatever. And we've got two other ones that are really interesting that we really like that make SpireHelm unique. And I think that is way more approachable to somebody than something else. That being said, to Moth's point, I think it would be really cool to have a realm event about just races, but I wonder if we do that with the new races in the future. So we do, this realm event is about the peoples, so to speak, the kingdom affiliated races, the Spire folk and the Worldlenders. And then if we wanted to, we have an entirely separate realm event, like say 10 realm events from now or 6 or whatever. And it's right about giants, gnomes, fairies, merfolk, swamp folk, any sort of magical, like these new races. Since the age of magic has come about, new mysterious, magical, enchanted creatures are spawning in, and their communities are seemingly popping up out of nowhere with histories of magic, like as if they were from some other realm, that they are just now here. And I think that could be way more interesting, and it lends itself to the fantasy itself. It lends itself to the world and the story of saying, we don't know anything about these races, they are just spawning in because of magic. They are not like us in the sense that they have been here for a long time and are like just entirely natural races, but they are just like us in the sense that they, you know, have their cultures and communities and their trade and their cultures and religion and whatever. So I think that could be really cool. I think that's where I would lean towards if we were to do a completely community-based thing. And then we could accept 10s or 20 of them, and they could each be canonized in their own small little way, instead of just like, you know, being overwhelmed with, hey, you got to know all of this stuff because these are the ones that are important for storytelling. That's really what the compendium realm events right now are about, is let's get the most important stuff first, and then we can build off of it going forward. And I think the new magical enchanted races are less important right now, but could be really fun going forward because they fulfill sort of that gap in storytelling and fantasy that we're looking for. Ollie was saying, imagine that elves in my submission are people of a long fell elvish empire who can't let go even after it's long gone. Would that work? Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be really cool. Tolkien's elves were supposed to be the symbols of nobility, but with the world not having the history of the elvish supremacy, I thought that could work as a spin on the old trope. Yeah, that could be really cool. By curious, I mean races you could see in any of the Valenholds. Yeah, I think that's what these are. These are pretty much like this section is the people you would see in the Valenholds. Oh, whoops, so you guys can't see this. This section is the people you could see in the Valenholds. And this one is mostly outside of the kingdom, but could interact with the kingdom. Because there's never going to be a perfect line we can draw of like in and out. There are humans who are not part of the kingdom. There are elves and dwarves and whatever, but like the vast majority are the Spire folk. And then there are the Worldlenders, who are the people who decide that the bulk and the majority of these people live outside of the walls of the kingdom. And then there are also those who are less civilized, say giants, merfolk, you know, people in a way, but not necessarily like commoners, I guess. So, are giants not an old race? I think giants are an old race. I don't know where I put them. There's two different pages kind of here. There's the kingdom affiliated and unaffiliated, but this is not this section, the history section, which I know is super confusing. These are just notes. These are the old races. So I think, yeah, giants are considered old and ancient. Maybe not ancient, but old. Maybe ancient. I don't know. I think this is kind of like really ancient. And giants are probably somewhere between the old races and the ancient races. Like, once again, it's not perfectly, there's no year where all of these races spawned in. It's a blurred history. We have to remember these people are living in an age of like the Middle Ages and don't have archaeology tools and carbon dating and or anything. They just find artifacts and they do their best. And yeah, magic can help them gauge the age of an artifact, but it's probably more an era than like a specific, this is exactly this many years old. Therefore, we know that the giants spawned into land 2,000 years after the dragonkin, and 500 years before the elves, which were 200 years before the dwarves. Um, yeah. Early Middle Ages or Middle Ages, I don't know. Middle Ages versus early. I don't really know too much. Early Middle Ages is 500 to 1,000. Um, Probably Middle or High Middle Ages, 1,000 to 1,300. Gothic cathedrals. I think I don't know exactly. I couldn't tell you exactly. Once again, it's fantasy, but either way, this is pre-Renaissance at a minimum, to the point where they don't have, they don't have the same tools that we do to understand history. And if we're leaning into the elves, dwarves, halflings, and stuff, we're kind of like wiped out, then there wasn't any effort made previously to preserve that. And so we as the archivists are going and uncovering an age past and knowledge to try to prevent this coming calamity or whatever it is. That's kind of like the underlying motives. So, also, I feel like we should limit how old each race can get before we start the realm event, so we don't go crazy and remove some of the mystery. That is a very good point. Let me go to the bathroom really quick, and then I will be right back, and then we can talk about that. I think that's very important. All right, we're back. Catch up on chat a little bit. So it's up. Okay. Imagining that early would be more Norse, the English, but middle would be more like the invasion of Normandy, um, with more of the advanced Middle Ages. Yeah, I think we're probably closer to the middle, high Middle Ages, or advanced Middle Ages. Yeah, I mean, like we're gonna have armor, like fantasy armor is very like it's not. I don't know. There'll be armor, there'll be castles, cathedrals, that sort of thing. So enough of that sort of architecture. It's fantasy, but it's inspired by that sort of Middle Ages thing. I feel like over 150 years, you need magic to keep going for any race. It would be crazy to cap dwarves at 150 and elves at 300. Don't want it to be everyone lives longer than humans. Overall, I feel like we are in a weird tug of war between making project generic enough to be accessible, but not so generic it doesn't stand out. Needs to be reconciled before this goes live. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's the hardest thing with this entire project that I've juggled multiple times. Like I go back and forth on it every other day, where I'm like, we need to be more unique and try our own spin on things, and then there are other days where I'm like, oh, we just need to go back to what makes dark fantasy, and just stop trying to force any sort of uniqueness at all. But there is also the idea that, like, I wouldn't say that the project is founded on anti-AI things. It's just one of the like principles of the way that we do things. Like it's not like, because I think I do think AI spits out generic, boring slop. It's easy, it's no effort, and it can't do anything really that cool. Um, but I don't think it's just the genericness of the AI that makes AI useless, and I don't think that because AI spits out generic stuff that we can't also, that I don't think that means that anything generic from us is as bad as AI slop, if that makes sense. I think there's a slight distinction there. Um, but but yeah, trying to not be too generic, but also unique. Because a lot of fantasy worlds start with some trope or idea that their world lives off of. So it's like, what if X, like if this fantasy world is taking place in the Bronze Age or the early Copper Age or something like that, where it's like this unique spin on, or this fantasy takes place based on the cultures of Central and South America, which is really cool. And that lends itself to this uniqueness where traditional fantasy as it started was mostly, you know, medieval high European influence, mostly thanks to Tolkien. But yeah, there's a super fine line between, like, I don't want the entire premise to be just it's a fantasy realm if the magic was corrupted and corrupts people, because there's lots of magic systems or magic worlds that do that. But yeah, it's really hard because the really what I originally envisioned SpireHelm to fill was people were seeing these AI slideshows and aesthetic slideshows on TikTok and stuff that were blowing up because people were like, man, this genre of AI just, or a genre of AI, genre of fantasy is just kind of gone. Like now everything is high fantasy. D&D is high fantasy. Game of Thrones feels kind of high fantasy. Lord of the Rings feels very high fantasy. Every piece of content that's coming out, Brandon Sanderson fantasy is very high fantasy, sci-fi adjacent. And there's not a lot of like traditional, like old school dark fantasy stuff coming out because the people who made it back in the day are dead and or retired, and the people that are doing new stuff are doing new stuff. And so there is this void of people saying, I want this thing, and there is no such thing that exists that is happening right now. I can go read the old classics, but there are also some artifacts of old stuff in them. There are some things that we have progressed past that I'm like, we don't need this. We don't need the super scantily clad female like warrior who's wearing like a chainmail thong, like that sort of thing. I don't think is very interesting, and I think that's like the worst side of generic traditional dark fantasy stuff. So we have the benefit of being in with new technology, with the internet to communicate, and I thought, man, it'd be cool to have a collaborative project. And so that's kind of what birthed this whole thing, was like, there's this gap here, and also I think it'd be really cool to do a community-based living IP. And so that's kind of where it was like, that's where SpireHelm was born out of. And so I think I'd rather err on the side of traditionalism when it comes to what makes the fantasy. So necromancers, dark magic, dragons, orcs, goblins, that sort of thing. Because that's what made a lot of the dark fantasy stuff. It wasn't just the super buff guy, although it does play a big part in it. But it's not always just the super buff guy saving the dark, or the blacksmith's daughter from the dark magic wizard, whatever. There was more to that, and I think the further we step away from those traditional dark fantasy things, the more people are going to say, oh, well, this is just a new high fantasy thing that feels maybe not generic. It might have its own unique spin, but it won't feel like dark fantasy anymore. And so that's kind of where I would rather err on the side of traditional dark fantasy with our own small spins than our own huge spins on things with just some overtones of traditional fantasy. I don't know if that's helpful at all in that, but 150 for dwarves, 200, 250 for elves, the equivalent of a human reaching 100. Low infant mortality was common in the time period. Yeah, don't need to go too realism with infant mortality though. Human lifespans can be cut shorter more by violence in the nature of the realm than by disease. Yeah, definitely. If they reach old age, they most likely reach the modern age of 80-ish. Yeah, that's probably fair. The longer you live, the longer you are likely to live. In other words, people who make it to 90 are more likely to live till 100. Is that like a human stat, or is that what you're saying for SpireHelm? I think that's kind of like isn't that like how humans work? Like if you make it to 95, you're probably more likely to make it higher than 95 or something. So yeah, we might need to do, these might need to be each their own headings. So let's do heading 3. And then this is normal text. Blue. This is normal text. This is normal. This is normal. Okay, perfect. Age. Let's go lifespan. Real thing. Yeah, yeah. Here's a question. Does having a unique lifespan for each race make any meaningful difference? I mean, it's like the nicest way possible. But like we were saying, what's the point? What is the fantasy of these things? Does having different age ranges make a meaningful difference in the realm or in storytelling and what people will interact with? Or is it just for the sake of not just having everything be the same? Because I wonder if we really need, do we really need lifespans? Because, and this is a question, this is not me saying like we don't need them at all. I'm just asking what is the lifespan doing for each one? For Tolkien, the lifespan for the elves brought them, it made them immortals. Like it gave them a reason to leave the realm when they were ready to die. They would go to the, I don't remember the name, go across the sea. It also gave them extra wisdom because they had lived a long time. It gave them this sense of more than a human, because like I can wait. There's that one Thranduil when he's talking to the dwarves. He's like, I could have you rot in here for 1,000 years and it would feel like nothing to me, basically. Yeah, so that like lend itself to the story, to the politics of the world, to interpersonal conflicts and dynamics, which is great. So if we're going to set unique lifespans for each one, if they're not going to be very similar, I mean within a 20 or 30 years of each other, from the lowest to the highest, then there should, or maybe 50 years from the lowest to the highest, then I think there should be a good reason to justify that for our realm, other than it just being, well, it's what always happens. It's every elf is immortal kind of thing. So I don't know. Qualitative elves live longer is what I would write. Lifespans are a staple of elves. My biggest gripe is that other stories throw it in because it's cool and you don't realize how much it affects things. Yeah, make elves lifespan just a wee bit higher. Yeah, I think there is a fantasy there. What does each fantasy race fill? Maybe we should just start. Maybe we should just throw that on here. It might be more helpful to just go through this. We may have to come back to this in another stream as well and keep working on this sometime this week. I have classes. Oh my gosh, I'm busy like all the rest of this week. This may be like next week, Tuesday next, like a week from now, we come back to this and keep working, because I mean I can stay on for another couple hours here. And I'm happy to. It's fun. But I think this will be, I mean, I'll be working on stuff. And maybe we'll do an afternoon live stream for the people who can't hop in the mornings as much. I love you guys, but there's also a portion of the community that doesn't get to hop in live streams as much, which is sad. Anywho. But I think we should answer this for each. And I think there should be, like Joe was saying, I want you guys to decide as well what makes your orc or your elf an elf, and what makes them, what is it about? But I think that what is it about can be answered in multiple different ways. In Tolkien's fantasy, it's about the ancient race that the Middle Earth kind of belongs to in a way. It's also about their departure from the realm. It's also about their forest hunters, archer, high skill, high dexterity, this sort of almost like this higher human, a superhuman almost. And so there's lots of different ways you could answer these questions. So I think it'd be good if a few of them are answered before the realm event, and then you can also answer it yourself with your fantasy, with your descriptions, with your whatever. So we need like just a symbol or a word. We need to shorten this somehow. Oh, let's just go fantasy. So I think there is an inherent fantasy in elves that you guys were talking about of wise, old creatures. Yeah. So long-lived, and these are all on the chopping block, but also we can spitball as much stuff as we want. Long-lived, wise. Like, do we do dexterous? I don't know if that's the best word for it. I think we say like tough. If you have ideas, just spitball. Say the race and the description, the fantasy that you would give it, and I can throw them in. If you have other ideas that I'm skipping over. Oh yeah, magical. I think dwarves are also kind of magical in a way. Halflings are usually like maybe peaceful is the right word. Peaceful, delightsome. I think elves are wooded, mountainous. Everyone but humans are magical. I know. And I think the humans will have their own magic, but I think their magic may come from like their gods or something. I don't know. Once again, this is like the balance of like how much traditionalism do we go to and how much uniqueness and new stuff do we try. And it's going to be a balance. It won't ever be perfect with just the nature of the community project. Some people are going to take it in one direction and other people will take it in another, and that's totally fine. It's just where do we want the core to be that people move out from, because people will naturally pull SpireHelm in its own unique ways. And so we just want the core to be in a good place that we know will get pulled in different directions, which is totally fine. It's not a bad thing. Yeah. Long-lived, wise, dexterous, magical, wooded, tough, magical, mountainous. Yeah, I think there's an element of fantasy of these old creatures live in the natural world where man creates their own. Like they construct mega cities and towns, castles, walls, whatever. And compared to the hobbits, which I know is kind of more specific, but they live in the ground in a hole, and the dwarves live in mountains. The elves live in the wooded, the trees, woods, trees. But these are very Tolkien descriptions. There are also some other fantasy descriptions that I think could fit. We could look at dungeons, and because I think the things that people engage with the most in fantasy is Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, D&D. Is there any other really big ones that everybody knows? I think Lord of the Rings is the biggest one. Yeah, in modern fantasy, they're more arrogant. Yeah, they do have like a high horse kind of thing. Raised from the earth, elder days. many of them to explore other planes of existence. See, D&D is kind of getting into the more high fantasy planes of existence. I mean, they've always been that way, but it's definitely a departure from where we're kind of sitting. Gnomes, tieflings, brave and adventurous, journeys of discovery. So that's the opposite of a hobbit. We could try dagger, heart, races, ancestries. Dragons, dwarves are, let's see, naturally resilient, gemstones in their bodies, tattoos and piercings, hair grows thick on their heads. Elves are typically tall humanoids with pointed ears and acutely attuned senses. Tall, celestial trance instead of sleep, that's interesting. Fairies, fawn, furbolg, yeah, these are all like their other creatures, giants, halflings, 150 years, youthful, humans, infernus, orc, tusks. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. It's kind of hard. I don't feel like there's a lot of yeah, D&D's take on fantasy is why there's a market for retro dark fantasy in the first place. Yeah, they have kind of gone, not in a bad way, but they've definitely gone to the high fantasy side of things much more than we will here. Yeah, I'd rather not copy it too. I 100% agree. Yeah, but I guess I don't know. That's the thing. I because I don't just want, like, I want there to be a meaningful reason for you to choose a dwarf as a character in one of your stories over a human. That's really because we have hundreds and thousands of millions of stories about humans, and there's something fun about, something different. And with Tolkien's books and stuff, like the Legolas Gimli dynamic is something that people love because of the differences. They're not just humans that look a little bit different. There are inherent cultural and whatever differences. There are things that they view differently than each other. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, Ollie, let's see which channels for stuff. Oh, this one probably for now could probably be best had in history, I would think, or lore in general. I mean, lore general kind of turns into a lot. So if you're worried stuff will get lost in general, then I think history is probably the best place for this right now. I'm trying to not create a new channel for every single realm event like we had previously, where it was like there was just too many channels. Yeah, I think for races, probably history is the best place because it doesn't seem to be that active. Like the last time it was chatted in was like November 2025. And it kind of makes sense. I think histories and peoples. Um, I can update the name and change it. Histories and peoples. We'll update that name for now at least so that it's a little bit easier for people. Let's see here. We got fantasy for orcs. This is tough, tribal, barbaric a little bit, strong. These are like your traditional stuff. Oh yeah, we could have one that's just for the current event and not a new one for every event. Yeah, yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea either. Um, yeah, we'll leave it here for now, and then I think, yeah, we'll see how this event plays out and see if we need to have just a Realm Events channel, period. Because then I think it would also end up talking about the last ones, because we're still talking about the Valen holds in some ways, since the collaboration is still happening. Like there's kind of two happening at once, and once we have a third one, there may be like three happening at once, and then finally Valen holds will settle down, and we'll move to a fourth, and then there'll be those three happening. So yeah, we'll see. Fantasy, blah blah blah. Lifespan. We'll just check this on its own page. Man, I cannot hit this. Save the life of me. Okay. Lifespan. And that's the thing. I think if you wanted to implement a new sort of trope into fantasy, that's where I think you should look at the community race to say this is like, for example, if you want to be like, I want dwarves to be completely different. I want them to be, 17 feet tall and these like lanky stone creatures and whatever. Like we've been saying before, I think that pulls away from just the traditional dark fantasy thing that we're going for. So I would just make it a new community race. I always slur the word community. Like I can't pronounce it properly. That's probably where I would put it because I think that'd be more fun. And then the more stereotypical tropes, I think will still end up fitting kind of within the other races. But then that kind of brings up the question, what are we doing a realm event for? If we're going to kind of lean back on the traditional tropes of fantasy races, what is that comes back to the format. What is the goal? Which I think is on here. What is this? What's the goal? Let's make a heading. What is the goal? Can't spell, can't type at all. And I think the goal may not be come up with a entirely new take on fantasy races. I think that's not the goal. Am I right there? Or is this disappointing to hear? Because I feel like if that's the goal, then like Joe said, we're going to be fighting tug of war with this originality and traditionalism back and forth forever. And so I think the goal of this realm event probably wouldn't be an entirely new take on fantasy races. This is the asterisk. Oh, never mind. Do come up with one or two new fantasy races unique to SpireHelm. I'm sure I'm going to write a submission for the elves. Already wrote a song during the stream. Oh, cool. And a race for the Wildlanders, like the Wildling guides. Yeah, that'd be really cool. That'd be awesome. This is why we should do a stream to establish the key races and a realm event for the new races. If we give an end date to the new races. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good take. Because this is really the stream for the traditional races, and then yeah, I guess it comes down to the community race. But I think there is something in here. So the goals. Yeah, design the racial makeup of SpireHelm. That's a good one. Yeah. Design the racial makeup of kingdom and the civilizations of the woodlands. So for traditional races, I think we can have goals for both. For new races, because yeah, I think that's really where the confusion is happening, at least for me, is like, what's the point of completely overhauling elves if what we want is traditional dark fantasy? There's no point. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to copy and paste Tolkien's elves or D&D elves. And so I think the goal for the traditional races, if you're doing those, and once again, you can do both. If you're doing a traditional race, the goal should be like what makes SpireHelm elves elves. They still look and feel like 80% or 90% like your traditional fantasy elf. But there's this little bit to them that makes it SpireHelm. For example, they're, like we talked about, the creation myth, or these myths and traditions that they hold on to that, you know, that are connected to the realm that we interact with. For the Lord of the Rings elves, this is the first age, the second age, or whatever they were, the story of the Maiar, the Silmarillion, like that sort of thing. For um, for Gimli, it's the story of the Hobbit. It's retaking the Lonely Mountain. It's, you know, defeating Smaug, reclaiming a homeland, whatever. For the hobbits, it's like we've just lived here in peace forever. We just get second breakfast. It's little bits of culture like that. It's not completely overhauling it, and so I think that's the goal. Is I don't even know what to call it, but seasoning. For the new races, it is like carving out a new trope, establishing a vibe through cultures, traditions, aesthetics, etc. Main goal, design the racial makeup of SpireHelm. Secondary goal, use existing preconceptions of traditional fantasy races for accessibility. Yeah, I think I agree with that. But I think there is some stuff you could do. And so yeah, like Moth, you were saying like we could just do a stream. I think doing just a stream for the original races is good. And I think that's kind of what this stream and next stream maybe will be. It's like everything I think is necessary for the races. But then I think if you want to, you can totally, and I think part of the realm event, and is that confusing? If there's two different sides to it, is that confusing or is that fine? I think if it's clear, if this is the first thing that people are reading, what is the goal? Not to come up with entirely new take on traditional fantasy races, but do come up with one or two new ones. And I think I'll make it clear in here, if we do go this route, that you have two options when it comes to the type of submissions you're doing. And there may have to be a separate format for both. If you're doing one of the traditional races, then you'll have to be fit into a little bit more of a box of keep it traditional, keep it accessible, but tell us why, you know, for example, it was just like the pirates. Like we had in the Burl Deep and the Treasury thread, or the submissions, there were two different takes on what makes up seafarers. And that was like the tie that we had. So maybe this is a bad example. But on one end you have, you know, we just have fishing boats, and we have warriors who defend the bay from pirates, basically. Even though it's not Pirates of the Caribbean pirates, it's people on boats stealing goods. And then on the other hand, you have these free fleets who, you know, go out and compete in a way in this like free market of bounties almost for, you know, either plundering other enemy ships that are plunderers and or beasts and Baal and leviathans of the deep. And so both of those are good examples of you're not entirely reinventing what pirates and seafaring fishermen and coastal castles look like. You're just giving it your own seasoning, your own spin, and something that when people see, they will go, ah, a free fleet, the Merisium, the Treasury, the Warriors, I know that's SpireHelm. And so I think that's really what we're going for. I don't know the best way to word that yet. But I think that's the goal here. Whoops. Whereas for new races, it is different. It is, hey, within the context of dark fantasy, which race, what fantasy, what thing, what experience, what type of people do you want to see? And therefore, go and do that. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? Let's do civilized peoples of the woodlands. This can be a heading 3. This can be a heading 3. Okay. Sorry, I'm just thinking. If you have other ideas or thoughts, please let me know. Yeah, I think what are our goals? I mean, this is kind of redundant having it on 2 pages. Design racial makeup. Civilization in the realm. I don't know if that's a good way of, because we're not designing all the races, just the people who are civilized and in the kingdom is basically what we're doing this for this event. I think we should be prioritizing the narrative of SpireHelm and not the races. Who is being fought other than the Dark One? We have a human guy, good guy, but no bad guy factions. Yeah, that'll be one that we'll get to probably next, I feel like. Orcs and the other races are not what? Ollie. Not civilized or not in the kingdom. I'm just trying to think of the right word that clarifies that this doesn't include giants, gnomes, fairies. I think orcs are going to be in the realm event. It's just that they're like right at the edge of civilization because some orcs may participate, but I think some will also fulfill the traditional fantasy trope of not like evil but malicious raiders kind of things that orcs are often associated with, at least in traditional dark fantasy stuff. Take a little inspiration break. This looks like Mars or something. It's pretty tough right there. Warhammer, just Age of Sigmar. That's really tough. I feel like more design a culture and traits that allow some different narrative choices. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is like your traditional fantasy group right here. Elf, chick, old wizard guy, male knight, fighting some Bale of some kind. It's like pretty classic, which is what we're going for. We are going for classic. We just want to make it good. Like there's not anything happening. There's no content, no worlds to be a part of right now that are evolving or changing or living in any sort of way to participate in that fulfill this sort of dark fantasy thing. So, excited about the Dragonborn race, but it would help if one of the classic races was completely done by GA so I know a balance of seasoning. Oh, yeah. Are you saying like it would help if I completed, like basically as an example, if I completed the Dragonborn race or the Dragonkin race before the Realm event so that it would be like, here's an example of what, like basically if I did my submission that I knew in the most non-biased way would be accepted because that's what we're going to do for dragons, for example. And I may change my mind on dragons. We may come back to it, but if it's going to be Dragonborn, oh, you're saying like elves or even humans that I should do. Because I wouldn't want to cut you guys out of the. Oh, but you're saying Dragonborn are already too unique per project, and so it wouldn't be a good example because Dragonborn in our kingdom are a pretty far out there unique spin on. They're exactly what we're not doing with the other fantasy races here. Is that what you're saying, Joe? I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying if I were to do the Dragonborn, it wouldn't be a good example because it is a big spin-off from a traditional fantasy dragonkin because it's super, they're very rare. They're not like biologically created, they're more magically created. And so it would be more helpful if I did something like the humans, because it would be taking something traditional and spinning it off. I see that. Um, they were a problem already before by who do them? Humans, maybe? Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. So yeah, humans could be a good one that I could do beforehand, because if I do that one, then it gives you an idea of like how to spin things. Although humans are probably the ones that are going to be spun the least. Um, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Okay, yeah, I'll consider that. That'd be really smart, and probably helpful. Um, and maybe I could do the giants too, if the giants are, because I think the giants are a little bit more on the side of a traditional fantasy thing that people understand, but might need their own sort of flavoring and spin off for SpireHelm. But it doesn't necessarily fit into. But then again, giants are such a fun one that I think people will want to do stuff for later down the line when we get to other stuff. I don't know. I'm so torn with like how much. I can't think of one that I would want to do that would be only helpful and not take opportunities away from you guys to create down the line. Unless I just say I'm doing lizard folk because I think they're really cool and deal with it. You got to come up with something else, which is once again kind of a little bit unfair, but not ridiculously. Welcome back, lizard. Eating pasta. Sorry, we're doing a lot of thinking and scheming. Um, this is kind of all you've missed, really. We're kind of just trying to figure out what is the goal, like what is the fantasy that these races should be filling, and then we kind of got to, well, what's the point of this realm event? The point is not the point is to design the racial makeup of civilization in the realm, and civilization is kind of in quotation marks. We're not coming up with entirely new take on traditional fantasy races, but we are coming up with one or two new fantasy races unique to SpireHelm. And oh yeah, I guess this could be a. That's straight up not at all what I copied. There we go. Not come up with the nerd and take fantasy races. Do with cultures and a unique flavor to our traditional races, and then do come up with one or two new fantasy races for SpireHelm. Seasoning slash unique flavor. Yeah, this is difficult. I knew this event would be hard to pin down the best way to do it, but just because it's not super straightforward does not mean that it's a bad idea. I think it's just, if we want it to go well, it's going to take some work. Every good thing takes a lot of work, and this is no different. There's going to be some things that are going to be kind of a back and forth, and we'll have to cut some ideas and keep some others. One-landers. Okay. So, Pasta, you might be able to get some feedback on this as well. Joe is just saying, I think he might be on a call right now, but Joe is saying it might be helpful to have me basically complete my own submission of like pre-canonized, or not really pre-canonized, but canonized race, one of the races somewhere. So you guys have an idea of how much traditional fantasy to keep and how much new-ish, like a spin-off, to keep. Because sometimes it's hard to tell, um, like where to draw the line, and because it's a tug of war. It's we are doing something that's probably not the most optimal, um, but we are doing something that I think can be fun and should be fun. And so that's really what it comes down to. We just want to make it as fun and cool for as many people as possible, and as conducive to the future of the project as possible. So we're talking about, if I was to do one of the races, which one would be helpful? Because we aren't including humans in the realm event, so I could do humans. Joe was saying I could also try to do elves. I will end up doing the dragonkin, but I won't do them as part of this realm event because they're so far out. I don't know. Considering a different angle than what was been exactly outlined here for the orcs, would that still be okay, or should I stick to what was outlined here? It depends. What's your idea? Because if it's super far outside of what is traditionally understood, you may just want to make it its own thing. If it's something like based on culture or living conditions or something like their warfare, their weapons, or their biology or something, then it may just be better as a community race or a new, I don't know what we call these. Right now I'm just community race or new race, whatever. But if it's pretty well within the bounds of what people expect to find in dark fantasy orcs, then I think you're probably fine. Doing some inspiration stuff. That little guy right there, that green guy is sick. That's what I think of when I think of like troglodyte. Like, I guess it's more like a fish person. I don't know. Okay, we're getting distracted. Anywho. Sorry, I'm kind of slowing down, but I promise I'm still thinking. I'm just doing some calculations. My idea was to make orcs particularly passionate and emotionally volatile creatures, making them find it more difficult to live with other races. Oh, see, that could be cool. I think that's totally fine. I don't see why that wouldn't be compatible with traditional dark fantasy orc tropes. Maybe we just need a big question. I think we totally missed that before. How would the skeleton of submissions look? Oh, I know, seriously. That's going to be on this page somewhere. And I think that's still to be determined right now. Because I have an idea for this that would be very similar to the Valen holds. But for this one, it would probably look pretty different. Word count's going to stay the same? Probably not. Yeah, let's come back to that really quick. I had all this stuff planned out, all these notes, and then I haven't checked it since we started the stream. Other people, tribes, people. Okay, we got that. Pre-event details, which regions, fantasy, history guidelines. We kind of got that. Format. So let's make a rough format section. Yeah, it'll probably be pretty different to the Valen holds just because the concept is different. With the Valen holds, like we talked about, it was more environmental storytelling. With this one, it's much more cultural storytelling, and so I think it asks for different things. I loved the poems in the Valen holds because they were super fun, but this lends itself to environmental storytelling. This is a poem about a concept of a place. I don't know what the equivalent would be for a race of people. Would people write poems about their like kin? I don't that's one that's like I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. Um, totally could be. Description, yeah, culture description, make folk tales. So, let's actually, should we just do it? I think we'll just do it whole. I think we do a different page. Is that going to be annoying if there's a separate page for this? I think this one would just be easier if it was just format. I think this will just be easier for people. If it's all in one place, you can just go click on this page. I don't want to be the first page because I want people to have to read through this because some people may just skip over it entirely and miss the whole point. But I think this page would be well worth it. Let's go title. Okay. So we've got description, that's like the biggest one. Fiction, that's probably the second biggest one, in my opinion. History, potentially. I like the idea of poem, song, etc. And the idea is that your unique spin and invention will be in these sections, kind of like the Valenholds. Like I didn't tell you like the description is kind of enough, and I think maybe the description goes after the fantasy. I've seen this in right here actually in Draw Steel, which I think we're raving about Draw Steel. I've never actually played an adventure in it yet, but from a game design perspective, MCDM and their game designers are very good at what they do. They understand what is good for people, for their product, for the community they want to build, and they make sure that every choice they make is in service of their goal. So I've been trying to do that more for SpireHelm. One of the things they do, I don't know if you can see this, probably not well, is on their race pages, they have this, they have a tiny little section that is the description. And then they have this bigger section that is a fiction. And so the description is humans belong to a world in the way that other speaking peoples do not. You can sense their presence of this, you can sense the presence of supernatural, that oily smell in the air, whatever, whatever. Actually, no, this is all fiction. So we arrive here at the end of your first semester of human culture. I hope to see you next year in the Kalian Empire course. This is like from the perspective of somebody in a class. And each one of their ancestries has their own thing. So it's like polders are the most numerous and diverse after humans. They're not humans, but they live in and among humans and share their goods and culture. This is like the description section. So that's what I would assume in the description. This is, elves are the woodland creatures. They are whatever, whatever, whatever. This is very, what is the word? Oh my gosh, what is it called when you tell something? They are explicit. They are, it's exposition. This is what they are, period. Then there is the section beneath it. This is the on polder section. You can't really see it. It says, the three peasants, Jago and his wife Sarah and his sister Beth, sat together watching the three heroes talk in the crowded common room of the inn. Well, Jackson Bootlax seemed to be doing most of the talking. And then it goes on, and there's a page and a half. It's like all of this page. Where is it? All of this page and all of this page. And this is the description up here. So it's 2.5 inches of description and then 18, 20 inches of just fiction. And that's great. I think that's perfect. And I remember them being backwards, where it gives you the fiction first. But I guess it doesn't. So we could do fiction first, we could do description first. I'm fine either way. I just think that's a gold standard. I think it works really, really well. And the fiction allows you to show what you don't want to have to explicitly say. It allows you to do things within culture, cultural descriptions, traditions, daily habits, aptitudes, cuisine, occupational roles, all of those sorts of things are better had in the fiction, not the description. The description is just this is what they are, this is maybe the fantasy they fill, and that's kind of it. So what they are, what fantasy they fill. And I think the fiction should highlight what is like important to them. And this might be like one or two of these. So what is important to them? Their traditions, their culture, I guess. I mean, these are all kind of like synonymous. Culture, traditions, and important priorities are basically the same thing. Habits. You could double down on. Oh, I think that's about it. And then history section, which I wonder if it's kind of synonymous with the fiction. I don't really know what this section would be for. Yeah, this is really hard to quantify. I think Joe has a point that it might be easier if I just make one and then not to just use it as an example, like I'm some gold standard, but I think it'll be easier to know what fits in which section if you can tell, if you can read it. And like I said, I really like the Draw Steel. You can find all of Draw Steel's stuff. You don't have to pay for it. Draw Steel Compendium. It's all open source. Rules, ancestries. Let's go dwarf. So there it is right there. Possessive of strength that belies their size. Dwarves have flesh infused with stone. Silico organic hybrid, making them physically denser than other humanoids. Blah, blah, blah. Dwarves are the children of the elder god Ord. A common phrase among dwarves is Ord made the world. Their way of saying what will be perfect. This is like a little bit of everything. Tells you what they are, some things important to them, their reputation as savvy engineers, technologies, thanks to the lore they inherited from their elder siblings. It tells you a bunch of little bits about them. But then this section on dwarves, they can be stubborn. Look at that. Look at that. Boom. And then these are like the how the dwarf interacts with the game. So rune carving, whatever, and then all the stuff there. So similarly, I mean, if you want to use this as a good standard, I think this is one of the best introductions to a race possible. And we don't need this section particularly. However, if you already had this section, or these two sections, it would be very easy to know what to come up with if you were going to run your own D&D game, or etc., because that is one of these things that I know people would like to do with SpireHelm in the future, me included. Yeah, I think this description is a little short. I think 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs, I wouldn't mind. And this is a little long. I think that's quite a bit. Although maybe not too long. I don't know. So we'll figure out word counts, but I think something, probably no more than 2 or 3 times this size, and something no less than half of this size is probably about right. Not perfect, and they're all different, I think. Hakan, yeah, this one's a lot bigger. This one's about the same size. High Elf, it's a much shorter fiction, pretty short description as well. Human, short description, very short fiction. So, like, I don't want you guys to be locked in. I want you to be able to do whatever you need to. I just don't want it getting to book length, chapter length. It should be able to fit on a page of a book. If we were to make a Draw Steel size book, a compendium for SpireHelm, we want the humans to be 1 page, want the orcs to be one page, elves, whatever. Some cool art, some cool stuff. So that's yeah, I would say draw steel is a great gold standard for this sort of thing. It's very, they're good in a lot of ways, but this one specifically right now, I think it's pretty much perfect. What they are, what fantasy they fill, brief overview of characteristics and culture. And then this should highlight. So I'm pretty sure, I could double check here. Today Ajax's name is on everyone's tongue. We learn many great evils that plague this world. So there's nothing in here, in this fiction part, that's really pivotal that you need to know. This is an optional thing to get you engaged in the story, engaged in the world, and engaged in the lore. It gives you a hook, a reason to care about the description. So we could just put that in here. A reason to care about description and race in general. So yeah, it's probably hard to get it to highlight every single one. If I think some are better in certain ways. For example, the humans one in here, they don't touch on human culture much. I don't think it kind of touches on Ajax and some of the lore around the world. It's just about a human. Whereas I'm sure if I went to Woad Elf, going back, yep, going in circles, I'm pretty sure there's going to be something in here. This is huge. Holy cow, this is cool. I would imagine those touch more on the culture. So if you're trying to choose, okay, am I doing orcs, halflings, whatever, the halflings might be more about the way of life. And the dwarves may be more about, for example, if I was writing about Lord of the Rings, if I was writing the Hobbit, the descriptions would be the descriptions. We've already talked about descriptions. Everybody knows what a Hobbit is. Everybody knows what a dwarf is in Lord of the Rings. If I was writing the fiction for halflings, I would write about the pleasantness of the Shire, the 7th or 11th breakfast, the drinking at night, the parties, the fireworks, the gift giving, all that sort of thing. It would be the on hobbits or concerning hobbits chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring, which is humongous. If I was writing about the dwarves, I would write about the opening monologue to the Hobbit movies, which talks about the city of Dale and Thror and Thrain and the Arkenstone, and then Smaug coming in and desolating it, and how there's like this, when the thrush knocks, that's when the dwarves will reclaim their homeland. That fiction serves way more about the dwarves than anything else possibly could. But trying to give that same sort of historical myth, legend for the hobbits wouldn't do half as much as just showing you their day-to-day life. So take your own, take what you think is the most important thing. I think that's what I'm trying to say here, which I think I did. Yeah, what is the most important thing to these people? For the dwarves, it is reclaiming their homeland. It is their right to the Arkenstone, the treasures, the hoard. To the hobbits, it's about 11th breakfast. It's about gift giving. It's about their quaint little life. It's about their garden. It's about their just sitting around fat and telling stories, you know? So that's what the fiction should highlight, is what is most important to them. And that could be, so maybe we put what is most important to them. One or more of these. Their traditions, their culture, habits, history, day-to-day life, struggles. 6-word limit. Yeah, I think you can do way more with 6 words than like a couple thousand. Just elves are cool. They have tree. There we go. That's it. That's the whole fiction right there. No, I think the history section. Do we need a history section for all of them? Or does the fiction, do you have the option to make the fiction section history if you want? Because like we said, for hobbits, for halflings, you may not feel that a history is necessary. For this one, you may not even have a history at all if it's brand new. if they just spawned in off of magic and they're a brand new race, then maybe they don't have a history or a creation myth or a rightfulness myth. But like Ollie was talking about with her elves, they might. So orcish clogs for sale, never worn. Beautiful. This is literally Shooken Spear. Yeah. So I think submission format, description, probably shorter than fiction. We'll go word count shorter than the fiction. Word count fits on a page. No, I don't want a happy face. I want the actual. Never mind. Whatever. Man, my voice is giving out. We not have different groups within the peoples. Yeah, that's a question to answer. Let me go to. Let's go to this one really quick. Clarify region basics. It's probably not even as much of a priority. How to handle groups within peoples and races. Whoops. Do we do multiple winners equals, oh, where's the equal sign? Oh, it's that. Equals multiple groups, or one submission could highlight a few groups, or each submission is an overview and authors outside of realm events can spin their own groups out of the foundation. Every healthy fantasy world needs at least 20 races for a race. High elf, wood elf, dark elf, low elf, leaf elf, light elf. Yeah. Let me get that website finished so we can have a giant wiki of every single possible race ever. So yeah, I don't know which of these three I really like the most. I right now I'm leaning towards the third, where it's like if you can just do an overview, and within the fiction you could maybe in the fiction you could highlight a little bit of different groups. You could at least allude to the idea that there are multiple groups. I think orcs, obviously, we assume if they are somewhat tribal in nature, then there's going to be different tribes. I don't think anybody's going to be confused if you don't clarify every single one. And I'm leaning towards not clarifying every single one for the orcs, because I think that allows for an amount of nuance that I think people want with orcs, where they're not entirely evil. Goblins are kind of the all evil, all greedy, all violent. Orcs are on the mostly barbaric side, but that doesn't necessarily make them evil. But I think if you're going just kind of more of the foundation, then it'll be easier for people to decide how they want to spin unique cultures. And the other thing with groups is like we got to remember the fantasy or the history behind, I guess, the fiction that we have, the lore, the fiction that we are going into this realm event with, which is these are remnants of a past age. So there may have been flourishing communities of multiple kingdoms of elves and dwarves, but now they are kind of just dwarves for SpireHelm. They, for the most part, they are just intermingled with man, and they've kind of lost their heritage, their culture in a way. They're refugees, immigrants of sorts. Like they've kind of left behind, like their home doesn't exist anymore, and so they are whatever's left. So I think that's probably important to remember going into this. Dork orc, cork orc, pork orc, spork orc. Wow, quite the combination. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously we can have mood board if we want. This is, I cannot hit the right buttons. Sorry, I have like a split keyboard. All of my keys are on different layers, and so sometimes I forget which keys to press in which order to get to certain symbols. Um, be cautious how this is done because I'm speaking about my knowledge of orcs and D&D. They were completely changed from being completely barbaric. Yeah, yeah. I know like D&D has kind of gone the more, I don't know, like nuanced route with fantasy races where it's like there are no evil races really. It's all just kind of depends. But with like traditional dark fantasy, I think we're more leaning towards what people expect to see, which is, you know, the civilized folk are the, the elves, the dwarves, the humans, plus a race or two, and then like the orcs represent more of the less civilized. There may be some that assimilate into kingdom culture and trade and whatever, but for the majority, they are kind of outside of that. Um, yeah, yeah, we definitely don't want to tie any sort of things to real life of like people saying orcs represent some race that we can just be mean to, obviously. Um, but yeah, I think as long as the orcs and stuff in the fiction aren't like, if they are more monster than man or whatever, then it's fiction. It's not human racism or anything like that. So yeah, but obviously if somebody's submitting things to SpireHelm that are just like obviously trying to put stuff in, then that's not the place for it. So um, they raid, steal, and connive for all the betterment of their goblin society. Exactly, exactly. And they will just kill any outsiders. Yeah, it's like the Hobbit. The goblins in the Hobbit aren't necessarily like 100% evil. They're not Sauron's armies, but they are like they'll just kill the dwarves just to eat them, which is enough for the dwarves to fight for their lives and do whatever. And they're also like the Goblin King like sits on all the other dwarves and like squishes them and whatever. Like, they don't really care for each other much more than just the biggest, strongest guy is the one that rules, and there's no real democracy. It's just barbaric and whatever. So I think that's pretty fine to have in the within the fantasy. There needs to be some amount of monsters and peoples that oppose civilization as a whole and are just in it for the plunder and the whatever. So let's see. So we got the goal, kind of. Submission format, a little bit. Um, what other things do we have in the Valenholtz? We had the name, credits. Oh yeah, probably credits. Submission format. So we got credits, poem or flavor text. I think that's kind of, I don't know. Main description, map of the location, fiction writing, mood board, concept art. I think that's pretty much it. This one might be a lot smaller in some ways. Um, so I think the poem song would be in the fiction. So description, whatever fiction. So This would likely be in... What's the word for... Somebody was talking about it earlier this stream. I know they were. Things that are in world versus out of world. Maybe I'm thinking of something else that I was watching the other day. In world writings or experiences. We'll say like scenes. Could be a collection. Yeah, I don't know anything about means of destruction. Never heard of it. Of multiple separate entries. If helpful. Okay. What they are, fancy to fill. Okay, so description. This would be a of the races. Outsiders and outsiders. Or archivist description. Outsider or archivist description of the races. This could be like elves come. I don't even know. Come from. Yeah, I don't even. I'm not going to give an example. Oh wait, means of destruction. Wait, yeah, I saw this thing. Yeah. I saw that guy. Yeah, I saw the. I've seen the TikToks and I've seen the trailer for it. Yeah, it seems pretty funny. Like a not so serious show. Like a seems pretty fun. Yeah, I hope it does well. Um. Yeah, I've seen. I didn't know that's what it was called, but yeah, I've definitely seen that. So I think the fiction will do similar to the Valenhold's fiction, where you can kind of splice together multiple things if you want. So if you want to writing scenes, poems, or otherwise, if you want to do something like a poem, you could do a poem. But if that's only part of your word count or whatever, you could also do a scene. So like we were talking about how Draw Steel is a great example. This one's like a scene. I'm scared. We should go back. There's dialogue. There's stuff happening. If you want to do that, great. If you don't have to. You could tell a story. It could be just the legend tells, for example, like the intro to The Hobbit is a great one. The city of Dale, the Arkenstone, the king, the dragon, that sort of thing. If that's helpful, do it. If it's not, and you'd rather do poems and some dialogue, do that. These would be like, once again, kind of collections of the archive. These would be collected records for the archive. Most likely. These would likely be collected records for the archive. And I think that's where history would go if it's necessary. Well, I have a mood board of the race, the vibes, or that you would like the races to fit. Maybe not. Maybe. I think right now we're just like, for example, the traditional races. So we've kind of split them into two. You may have stepped away for this part, but yeah, they're basically there's going to be the traditional fantasy races, which are elves, dwarves, halflings, and orcs, and obviously humans we're not writing about, but they also exist. And then there is the option to come up with a completely new one, um, and that's that. So yeah, we will. This is kind of like the fantasy, like the long-lived, wise, dexterous, magical, wood, trees, whatever. What we're not doing is completely spinning off every single one of those races. We are going to pretty much rely on traditional dark fantasy tropes. That's the main goal of the SpireHelm project, is to fulfill this gap in there is no content happening in this realm. We still want our own unique flavor to it, but it will mostly look fairly generic, especially with the traditional races. So your elves are going to have pointy ears. They're going to probably live a little bit longer than humans. Maybe not like Lord of the Rings elves, but maybe 100 years longer or so. Your humans are going to look pretty similar to humans. Your dwarves are going to be mountain, type dwarves, whatever, whatever. So I might not make a entire like mood board for it, but you can kind of count on your traditional halflings, humans, elves, that sort of thing, basically working if you can find it somewhere like this. If it fits the vibe, it's probably already 90% of the way there. Then it's just, okay, well, what makes, because you can tell when you're looking at a Tolkien dwarf or a Tolkien elf or a, you know, D&D elf, you can tell the difference. So we want to be able to tell the difference, even though the similarities between D&D and Lord of the Rings are more similar than they are different. So yeah, we'll probably do a couple what it's not, and I think there is a little bit of that right here. What's the goal? Design the racial makeup. Do not come up with an entirely new take on traditional fantasy races. Do come up with, unique culture, flavor, whatever, and do come up with one or two entirely new fantasy races if you want. Yeah, fantasy races work. People are familiar with them. That's what we're here to do. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to make it roll. But yeah, so for the new races, yeah, you can completely do your own thing, whatever. For the traditional ones, it's going to be more like what makes a SpireHelm elf an elf in SpireHelm and not just a Tolkien or D&D elf, since the D&D elves, dwarves, orcs, etc. have kind of gone in their own high fantasy direction. We're kind of trying to go backwards in time in the good ways, not the bad ways, but in the good ways, to get down to like the vibes, what made dark fantasy, and a lot of it can be found kind of in there. So let's see. About elves, which route do we go? What elves are high elves? That's a good question. I think I'm gonna back this up. I'm leaning towards wood elves because without their civilizations, their kingdoms previous, their like the high elf sort of thing, I feel like kind of dissolves. Because right, isn't like high elf being about being like the noble, yeah, ancient noble, highly magical subrace of elves, graceful, intelligent, deeply connected. What is the difference between that and a wood elf versus high elf? Let's see. Physical agility, nature. I don't know. I guess high elves are those more magical ones. Oh, I think I'm trying to think with like what's compatible with other lore that we have, because we do want everything to fit. I think if we get too locked into just one idea, then we forget about other stuff. With magic, um, feeding off the souls, ancestors, and memories of others. Sorcery pierces the veil, world unseen. This is a cursed magic. I don't want elves to be cursed, likely. So I don't want them to necessarily have any sort of inherent cursed magic that they're born with. But druidcraft seems like something that the wood elf would be familiar with. They could have high magical powers. They just come from nature, and that comes more through druidic natures. Oh, high elves lost their status but stayed arrogant pricks. Interesting. Wood elves work less the mystery and danger of the nature in the current realm. I agree, but then I also think that high elves don't work super well with the politics of the kingdom, because then that kind of begs the question of where did they come from? Obviously not hematurgy, benediction, arcanism though, cosmos, laws of reality. I mean, if you're talking about or wizardry, I think either of these two could work for high elves that have connection to, either they're learned or it's some, if the elves are the descendants of the stars, which I think is a Lord of the Rings trope, then something through arcanism, their power can be drawn from within, their mana compounded by celestial movement, the stars, the laws of reality, that sort of thing. I don't know if I have a super. Yeah, maybe somewhere in the middle is better. And I don't think they're incompatible entirely. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So probably somewhere between wood elves and high elves. Urban, scholarly, refined, proud or formal. Grand cities, study history and master arcane magic. Wood elves, reclusive, feral, grounded. Deep forests in harmony with beasts and plants. They reject rigid civilization for freedom and survival instincts. So yeah, maybe I was thinking different about wood elves. My idea is that the elves are more reminiscent of the Mirkwood elves from Lord of the Rings than they are high elves from like D&D or Draw Steel. Because nature is dangerous. And nature is getting more dangerous. I agree. Like they wouldn't be the woad elves, but they also probably wouldn't be the high elves. You guys can't see the images here, but because they're copyrighted, so they don't have them for the open source stuff. Because I'm thinking like, not Thranduil, MTG, just Thranduil. Like this is kind of right in the middle, right? And you have the influence of it's very wooded. There is, this structure. Where are we at? Ah, tiny. Can't even see this. But yeah, like this sort of nature inherent structure with woods and stuff. But they're not necessarily feral. They don't reject civilization. So I feel like the Mirkwood elves are probably the closest thing. I mean, you could also, the Rivendell elves aren't far off. I don't know. I'm kind of open to either. I lean further away from urban high elves. Like super urban, long legacies of schools of magic and nobles it depends. I think it could fit, but you might have to work it out a little bit more. It might be. I think if SpireHelm's elves are somewhere in the middle, it's probably easier to move a wood elf closer to SpireHelm than it is to move a high elf. Not saying it's impossible or that you shouldn't try it. I just think it's probably just leaning one way or the other. So do with it what you will and what you want. So, and we'll see where it goes. Nature is supposed to be dangerous, like the majority of high elves. A slight affinity for nature and nature magics. Yeah, that's probably a good mix. There's not going to be elves just skedaddling through Malgrowth. Yeah, not the Malgrowth areas. Even without the Dark One, the Woodlands are supposed to be very dangerous. Yeah, I think they're like fairly dangerous, but pre event that changed the realm, the wildlands, the woodlands were at least livable. You could live in them, have a society in them, and now is the time where people are now only pretty much able to live in close proximity to the Valenholds because everything is too dangerous now. So there's some there's some push and pull there. And the elves have been around in the realm since before the humans, so they could have their own societies, and but they were small, like they weren't widespread elven kingdoms type of thing, not as big as the kingdoms of men, but they could have had their own little areas with castles and the small kingdom or fiefdom or whatever. And then when SpireHelm created its own kingdom, they said, "Yeah, we'll join in." And since then, things have ruptured, and their everything has fallen apart except for the Valenholds that were given to the Sanctiarchs originally, and now the people of them. So yeah, I think you could take it either way. But yeah, I think somewhere between High Elf and Wood Elf. I don't think either one is perfect, but I don't think either one is terrible either. So part of the arrogance could be their conviction to tame nature. Oh yeah, that could be cool. And like I said, I'm not opposed to like take what makes SpireHelm already and see how that would inform your writing. So for example, the malgrowth or the overgrowth, whichever, we haven't really made a huge distinction between the two yet. Um, yeah, maybe the elves were more in touch with nature, even if they were high elves of sorts, and the humans were just like we are with nature, where we appreciate it, we try to understand it, but we're not in touch with it. Like we can't communicate with nature directly. And maybe the elves could. And now that the realm is changing, maybe that arrogance comes off as a, hey, we are still the ones who can control nature. With us, your allies, humans, we can guide you through the wood, we can do whatever, these sorts of things. We can guide you through the woodlands because we are in touch with nature, whatever it is. So yeah, we could see elves touch nature, yeah. And then yeah, dwarves are kind of the same thing. Like, yeah, oh yeah, you guys know how to make swords and armor and stuff, but we know how to make swords and armor. We know how to like we're the original forge smiths, and we are whatever. Yeah. The gods, malgrowth, overgrowth, and races aren't really as connected as they should be. What do you mean by that? Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe we pause there for now. I think this is a lot to discuss and go over for now. I think it's at a good point. We've at least limited it down to the things I wanted to get done today were how many races. That was first and foremost. Format, which I think we've kind of got. And whoops. The format, I mean, it's not perfect, but we know it's going to have a description, a fiction, and a mood board. That's probably it, I think, really. I don't think there's much more. You can use the fiction section to do whatever you want. If you want it to include history, if you want it to include poems and songs, if you want it to include, obviously you can include your own drawings, or, if there's symbols, or like elves are often associated with like these swirls of, whatever, and the Lord of the Rings dwarves, at least in the movies, are kind of more Art Deco in a way, like rugged and sharpish angles and lots of like parallel lines and whatnot, where the elves are more natural. So if you want to include sketches and stuff like that, sketches slash concept art. If you have ideas for that sort of thing, throw it in there. There's never yeah, we had concept art in the original format. What are the gods to the races? What is the overgrowth doing to the wood elves? Oh yeah, that's a good thing that you could probably touch on in the fiction if you wanted. If you decide to go the more the wood elf route, or if you take this race and you make it some sort of more like a wood elf. Like if you have this community race fill the wood elf role of in touch with nature, the guides of the wildlands, they understand, they can breathe with the animals and speak with them or whatever. If you decide to do that route with this, you could definitely have, I think that'd be really cool moth to do, like to have the fiction section cover now that malgrowth is reoccurring in the realm and this growth is happening and nature is changing and morphing. They're struggling to communicate with most of the trees and the flowers like they used to because they're cursed, they're like corrupted, plagued or something. That could be really cool to touch on. Yeah, concept art, mood board, whatever. Okay, so that was one. Got the number. We're doing 6. these. Wow, where's 6? 6 are the races you'll be writing about in the relevant. Spirefolk, Woodlanders. Perfect. And then the last thing was regions. We had the map originally. We still have the map. It's not like I've lost it. But a lot of times, it makes a lot of sense for certain regions to belong to certain groups of people. However, this is just one kingdom. This is just SpireHelm. So it's not like Lord of the Rings where there is the Mirkwood elves, the Rivendell elves, the Lothlorien elves, the dwarves of the Iron Hills, the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, the dwarves of the Iron Lonely Mountain, Mordor, the Rohan, Gondor, the Shire, Bree, everything like that. So what we might just want to touch on next time, if we do another stream, and you guys, we can talk about this in the Discord. I think it'd be a good thing to have a discussion about, is in the writings, should we designate certain areas of the realm to these people? I lean towards no, because these are the people who participate in widespread trade and live in the Valenholds and the cities with people. So they probably don't have their own places, but they could, like we talked about, the giants are probably up north. The dwarves could kind of be northern-ish, and the elves could be from the east or the west or the woods. The halflings could be from the south in the warmer, more temperate areas or whatever. So we could kind of designate those sorts of things, or we could just leave it completely open. And if for your elves that you're making, if it makes more sense to kind of give them this homeland region, like the dwarves and the Lonely Mountain, then go for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So yeah, I don't think we should narrow it down yet. And because there won't be regions dedicated to specific races, I probably don't need to do any guidance on it. I think I just say, if you want to, you can. Otherwise, you don't have to, because the vast majority of these people, of these races, are already intermingled with humans to the point that it's indistinguishable for their own kingdoms and whatnot. The orcs are going to be in the Wildlands, and these people, so they'll be widespread in everywhere else that's not a city. Therefore, we know that there will be different groups of them in different areas, and you could define how they look different and whatever. So if you wanted gray orcs and green orcs, you could have some more in the mountains, more in the swamps, whatever. I think that's totally fine. And yeah, I think, like half dwarf, half elf, probably things that are fine. I know that's a little bit more of a modern fantasy thing, but I think there's enough room for it in traditional dark fantasy to be totally fine. Yeah, the regions will still need to be made, of course, based on the previous poll. Monsters will probably be next. Yeah, I think the regions will be made, but the regions won't be dependent, or the races won't be dependent on the regions for where they live, because they'll be living with the people in the community. You just might see some communities of elves that live more in the woods and dwarves in the mountains, and the dwarves might have an affinity for the fjord, Valenhold, and the elves might have an affinity for the river or the bay or whatever it is, History guidelines. I think the history guidelines I will probably put in this page somewhere. Maybe I should just throw it in right now. Let's put this. Oh wow, that looks weird. Is this Arial? Oh, it's all bolded. Why is it so big? 11? Oh, I don't know. So yeah, this will be in here. Yeah, old races. This is just like, I'll probably expand this, and this will be its own kind of like fiction of sorts that will maybe go over this so that you guys have something cool-ish to read that's inspiring and kind of gets you in the mood and gives you a sense for how the world views this history, even though it won't be like perfect. After the Dark Forces, I'd like to do a realm event on the Sanctiarchs. Yeah, I think that'd be really cool. Well, they're all the Spirefolk. I really hope Dark Forces next. We need villains ASAP. Yeah. I think the Dark Forces and the Sanctiarchs will give us a grasp on like the heroes and the villains of the world, like the big heroes and the big villains, and then we can go down from there into some more story is what people care about. You can have the biggest wiki of lore in the entire world, and nobody will care if the story isn't good. And it's pretty boring right now, boring, to just be writing the lore, but we need just enough to get started in the story, and then we can just go full force into who are the characters, who are the villains, what's the conflict, what's the drama, what's the stakes, and that's I think what people will start caring about more and more. And that's really what I want to do about for the series I wanted to do originally. The original thought for SpireHelm was I want to make a dark fantasy comic that the viewers get to choose. It's a choose your own adventure, week by week. I draw, animate, would do whatever, and then at the end it's like the top comment is the top liked comment is what the character does next. And so you'd have like 2 or 3 different storylines happening at once. You'd have the Sanctity arc, you'd have a wanderer with forgotten memories, and you'd have like some other woman, like girl or woman or someone in the realm, and their stories would kind of maybe cross paths at different points, and everybody would be able to, choose which direction these stories go. And I think that would be really cool to pick up again at some point. Not that I ever actually published anything, but I think it'd be a really cool thing to do because it would give people meaning, a story to care about in the realm that would be directly impacted by what we are learning / creating as a community. And so you'd have some, if you're participating in everything, you'll get some spoilers. You'll know who the big villain is going to be and what happens and whatever. But it gives you like some story to go off of. The reason to care, stakes, a home, a village, a victim, a hero, a conflict, the fights, that sort of thing. So as soon as we can get to that, I'm looking forward to it. Just right now, we just need to clarify a couple more things. Like we said, Dark Forces, Sanctity Arcs, Races of the Realm. What were some of the other ones in the Discord? I'm trying to remember. Lords and Rulers, Regions. That's it. Nobody voted. There's one vote for something else that's more pressing. So most people thought these are the most pressing things. And I think once we have those done, that might be enough to finish the compendium and kind of send people on their way to start creating stories and less lore and more real story. I don't know if there's any better way to put it than just a good story. So yeah, well, is there anything else on this stream that we need to cover? I'm pretty happy with where we're at right now. I'm tentative about releasing this doc right now. I know last time it was a little bit confusing. Some people thought that the Realm event was a go because this was shareable and people were in it. I don't know if I want to do that necessarily again, but I know it's helpful because I don't want people to think that the Realm event is starting right now, because I want to give everybody fair footing to get off. I don't want some people to get a huge head start, but obviously the people that are in here and collaborating and participating in the community are naturally going to have some benefit and some advantage over the others. Oh yeah, Beast and Bale event. Yeah, Evil Forces, monsters. Yeah, probably Beasts, Bale. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's about it for this one. But if you guys won't be too hurt, I think I'll keep this one for next week, and then maybe at the end of next week's stream, we can share this and talk about it. But at least you guys have this stream to reference. Everything's on it, so everybody can have access to it. Yeah, I think that's about it for me. Been going for what, like 4 hours now? 3 hours? Not too bad. Cool. Yeah, next week I start school. Yeah, I start school tomorrow. I have 7 a.m. classes. It's abysmal, but it'll be worth it. So already finished the songs for the submission. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will see you guys all soon. I'll be in the Discord the rest of the day. We can talk about it. I think somebody already started looks like History and Peoples. There was an elf one. Oh, Spire Folk with the Realm, elves. Yeah. I can start a new thread of just the Realm event as a whole. Spire Folk and Wonders Realm event. Oh, oops, that's the name. There we go. So that can be there. And if you want to talk about just general stuff there, if you guys want to make your own threads, at least the chroniclers can, or the arch chroniclers can make stuff. So if we want to talk about specifically, one of the races, we totally can. But yeah, cool. Well, I will see you guys all later. Have a good one. Warning for the loud song transition thing in 3, 2, 1.